Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Day Online Turkey event. I am Doğrusal Hemiş, the marketing manager of Cambridge University Press Turkey, and I would like to welcome you all to a day of exciting, brand new live session from international ERT experts. Once again, thank you for being with us. Firstly, I would like to give a brief about our event agenda. Our first speaker is Peter Lucantoni. He will be delivering a session on future learners need learning strategies. Peter Lucantoni has been teaching English, training teachers, and writing teaching and learning materials for more than 40 years. He is currently the Professional Learning and Development Manager for Cambridge University Press in the MENA region. He is also the author and co-author of several popular course books for students. Our session with Peter Lucantoni will be 45 minutes and possible 5-minute Q&A afterwards. And then we will have a 40 minutes of break. Enjoy your session. Over to you, Peter.
Günaydın Doğrusal Bey. Thank you very much for that introduction. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see so many people here this morning. We don't have a great amount of time, so I'm going to start immediately on my webinar this morning. Please use the chat box to ask questions. I'll try and read your questions and answer them. And I might also ask you to do a few things in the chat box as well. Unfortunately, we can't have audio because there's just too many people attending. So my talk today is called Future Learners Need Learning Strategies. And what I'd like to do is to cover these particular topics in the next 40 minutes or so. First of all, we're going to have a think about learning and think about what learning actually means. We're going to have a think about what learning strategies are, and then consider what we need to do in order to move into the future and the particular challenges that face us. I think obviously over the last 6 months with the COVID situation, we've got unique challenges which we probably weren't anticipating. But I think it's important to be positive and move to the future and think about future learners and make some conclusions as well. So what I'd like to do first of all is ask you a question, and I'd like you to think about this. What does the word learning mean to you? Now, we've got about 350 people in the room, so I don't expect 350 answers, but very quickly in the chat box, just 20 seconds. What does the word learning mean to you? What word comes into your head when you think of learning? There's no right or wrong answers, so don't be frightened of saying something in the chat box. Yeah, somebody, Aykut is saying improving, Alper changing behavior, Burju is saying new things, gaining, yeah, great. Learning is life, says Tamara. Lovely, that's very nice. Sorry, they're moving so quickly in the chat box that I can't follow them. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer, but the responses that we're seeing are all about progress and having knowledge and improving yourself. So that's brilliant. So what I'd like to do this morning is basically use the experts on the screen in order to talk a little bit more about learning and learner strategies and the future as well. Now, I'm sure some of the people on the screen you know, others you may not know. It doesn't matter, it's not a test. But I'm going to refer to each of these people at different times during the webinar. So this gentleman over here, obviously a Greek philosopher. Anybody know who it is? Who's the gentleman over on the right? Anybody know? I'll give you a clue. It begins with the letter P. No, not Socrates. Begins with the letter P. Plato. Yeah, this is Plato. And Plato said that we should never discourage anyone who continually makes progress, no matter how what. What do you think Plato said? No matter how what? Yeah, a lot of people are saying slow. Yeah, Plato said never discourage anyone who continually makes progress, no matter how slow. It doesn't matter what the speed of learning actually is. What we should be doing is encouraging students, even if they are taking a little bit more time. Do think about this in terms of the classroom. it's important that we provide students with thinking time. Some students need just a little bit more time, an extra 15, 20, 30 seconds, and they may be able to come up with a solution to whatever the task or the question is that you've set them. How long ago was Plato on the planet? When was Plato alive? Anybody know? How many years ago was Plato alive? 500-ish BC 200, about 3,000. Yeah, about 2,500 years ago. So even 2,500 years ago, people were thinking about education and learning and what it means. Okay, this lady on the right, I don't expect you to know who it is, but she was an American physicist, scientist. She won the Nobel Prize actually for chemistry and physics, I believe it was. And her name is Rosalind Yalow. And she said the something of learning separates youth from old age. As long as you're learning, you're not old. So what do you think she said? What do you think Rosalind Yalow said? Desire, process, spirit, age. Lovely, lovely, really nice words. Yep. Process, speed. Yep. Okay, again, it's not a test. It doesn't matter if you don't get it. The actual word she used was excitement. So the excitement of learning separates youth from old age. As long as you're learning, you're not old. So we need to make sure that the learning that goes on in our classrooms, the teaching that we do, does engage students in excitement. It gets our students feeling positive about the whole of the learning process. Okay, the next person is this gentleman over here. Again, I don't expect you to know who it is. I can't actually find a lot of information about this gentleman. But his name is Tom Whitby. You can Google him as much as you like, but he's very private, very secretive. So I don't know how old he is. I've got no idea, exactly what he's doing now, but I do know that he writes blogs about education. And I think Tom Whitby really the quote that I'm going to show you, I think really encompasses everything that I want to talk about today. And he said this: so what do you think the blank is in this one? Teaching kids how to learn becomes more important than teaching them what to learn when the aim, the process, the goal, yeah, lots of people saying goal and aim and process. Yeah, he actually said goal, but aim is okay. I even think that you could say the process, because the process involves this lifelong learning. So our job nowadays as teachers, yes, of course, we still need to teach them the present perfect and how to ask for something politely. But probably more important now is the strategies that our learners need. We need to help children to understand how they should actually be learning. And of course, it shouldn't just be a teacher-student process. It should be students working independently in an active way in order to improve their learning. And the last one I want to show you is by a gentleman called John Gardner. John Gardner was the Secretary of State for Education in the United States back in the time of President Johnson. And Gardner said this, that one of the reasons people stop learning is that they become less and less willing to risk what? To risk what? Time, failure, comfort, make mistakes, failure, losing time, humiliation. Yeah, making mistakes, their knowledge. Yeah, lovely, very, very good. He used the word failure, but many of you have got the idea. So one of the reasons people stop learning is that they become less and less willing to risk failure. And I think as we get older, we become more self-conscious, we get more embarrassed, we feel humiliated. And so possibly that's one of the reasons that we stop learning, or we reduce our learning, because we're worried about failure. Those of you in the room who speak English as a second or a third language, you'll know for yourselves that one of the reasons that the level of your English is so very high is because you took risks during the learning process. You didn't mind if you made mistakes and if you made errors. because it was through making those errors, through making those mistakes, that you actually learned. And this is what we need to consider in the classroom. And it's one of the strategies that learners need to understand. Learners need to take risks. They need to not have any fear of making a mistake. So we've seen 4 people as a sort of an introduction to think about learning. So now I want to show you a picture. And I would like you to put in the chat box anything that comes into your minds. What do you think when you see that? And remember, we're talking this morning about learning. So what does that picture tell you about learning? A journey, very good, yeah. Learning path, endless, lifelong, mystery, great, yeah. Well, there's so many responses, I can't read them, they're going too quickly. A long way, it's shaky, it's secret, there are risks. Yeah, lifelong, eternal, brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, fantastic words in the chat box. Thank you so much for that. This gentleman over here on the left, anybody know who this is? Famous American. Look at his glasses. I love the way he's wearing his glasses. Anybody know who this is? Yeah, you're still answering my previous question. No. Okay, this is Jerome Bruner, who was American cognitive psychologist and educator. And look at his age. Look how old he was when he passed away. 101 years old, Jerome Bruner. And I've put Jerome Bruner there because he's a bit of a hero of mine. Some of the things he's written I think are absolutely brilliant. But one quote in particular that I want to show you is this. I'll just leave you to read that for a second. So Jerome Bruner says that learning should not only take us somewhere, it should allow us later to go further more easily. So learning has to have a destination. It has to have a goal. It has to have a target. But probably more importantly, it needs to go beyond that immediate target. So it shouldn't just be about the short term. It needs to be about the long term. And I think we need to consider what we're doing in our classrooms. Are we teaching children for today, or are we teaching them to prepare them for the future? And I think in some cases, when we tell children there's a quiz tomorrow, there's a test tomorrow, we're actually only teaching them for today, for the test. But we need to be teaching them beyond that so that they can go further more easily in the future. Okay, this gentleman on the right is not a famous person. He's just an image. So I'd like you now to think about learning strategies and what a learning strategy is. And I think we'd probably all agree that a learning strategy is maybe a process or a pathway. It's a route, it's a journey, it's about reaching goals. And it's about this, isn't it? It's about this pathway, this bridge that you described earlier. So a learning strategy is something that we use in order to, as Jalal has just put, as solving problems. And so I'm just going to the chat box for a second because Sibel talks about, yeah, we need to be preparing students for jobs that don't even exist right now. And I'll come to that as we move through the webinar today. Okay, so a learning strategy then is something that we require, whether we're a student or a teacher or an adult, it doesn't matter who we are, but we need learning strategies in order to improve, if you like, or to make more effective the learning that we're doing. So I want to bring you back to Greek philosophers. This is not Plato, this is somebody else. Who's this? Anybody know? Begins with, no, it's not Aristotle, Esma, but thank you. Begins with S for sugar. Not Socrates, no, another S. No, not Herodotus. Yeah, Sophocles. And Sophocles said this, that one must learn by doing the thing. For though you think you know it, you have no certainty until you try. So you have to learn by doing, active learning. So even if you think you know something up here, you actually don't know if you know it until you try to implement it. So this whole idea about getting students to do things with language, communicative use of language, it's definitely not a new concept, a new idea. Look at when Sophocles was around. 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years before the Common Era, Sophocles was saying that we need to be active when we learn. Otherwise, we actually don't know if we've actually learned anything. Okay, this gentleman over here, his name is actually on the dollar bill. So this is Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin was alive about 300 years ago, 250, 300 years ago. And of course, he was one of the founding fathers. And he actually was one of the people who put together the Constitution for the United States, which obviously still exists today. So I want to show you something which is attributed to him, but other people say it wasn't Franklin, it's a Chinese proverb. But it doesn't really matter where it comes from. But he said this, he said, "Tell me and I forget." And you probably know what the next two lines are going to be in this little quotation. Anybody know what comes next? Tell me and I forget. Teach me. Yeah. Teach me and I may remember, or show me and I may or will remember. Yeah. And the last line? Yeah, I think Harkan, it's moved, sorry, and Alper have got it. Yeah, involve me and I learn. So this links back to what Sophocles was saying. Let's just quickly go back to that. One must learn by doing the thing, for though you think you know it, you have no certainty until you try. And then Benjamin Franklin is saying exactly the same thing. Okay, 2,000 years later, but the same thing is still true. And it's something that we need to reinforce in our teaching today, that involving students is likely to have a far greater impact on learning than just by lecturing and telling students things. Okay. So what's a learning strategy? We know that it involves doing something. We know that it's about activity. It's not about just sitting there and soaking up knowledge, that there's something more to it than that. And this gentleman on the left was, he's still alive, is an ELT specialist. His name is Vivian Cook. And he makes specific reference to learning strategies. And Vivian Cook says this, or said this. So a learning strategy refers to a choice that the learner makes while learning or using language. And I've put the word choice in bold because it's obviously the key word in what Vivian Cook is saying. So learning strategy refers to a choice that the learner makes while learning or using language. So what does that mean? That means that learners need, if you like, a restaurant menu of things that they can select, of strategies that they can select in order to find the answer to something, in order to complete a task, in order to solve a problem. This is what learners need. But the problem for us, of course, is how do learners get these choices? And the only way that learners can get choices is through us actually helping them to acquire those choices. And we'll look at some quotes about that in just a second. The other thing to remember, of course, is that not all learners will choose the same thing from the menu. When you go to a restaurant with your family, it's unlikely that everybody will choose the same items. This one will have this one will have meat, this one will have fish, this one will have vegetarian, this one will have vegan, this one will drink juice, this one water, this one Pepsi, and so on and so forth. So we're all going to be making different choices. So this lady over here, Madeleine Hunter, works at the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge, and she says exactly the point that I've just been making, that we can't expect all children, all students of the same age, in the same class, to learn from the same materials, or even using the same strategies. It's like expecting all children of the same age to wear the same size clothing. It just doesn't work like that. So everybody's going to be different, and everybody's going to need something different in order to be successful in whatever it is that they're doing. Okay, so the next person is this gentleman. Now, who knows who this is? Answers in the chat box. Anybody know this gentleman? One of the most famous ELT authors of course books. Yeah, Richards, Jack Richards. Yeah, Jack Richards. Jack Richards has not only written course books, Interchange and Four Corners, probably two of the most, particularly Interchange, probably the most successful ELT book ever written. But Jack Richards has also written an enormous amount of handbooks for teachers and methodology for teachers, particularly focusing on communicative language teaching. And in response to the question on the screen, what is a learning strategy? Jack Richards said this. Now, hopefully you've realized that I've jumbled up the words. I've mixed up the words in red. So who would like in the chat box to unjumble the words and tell us what Jack Richards said? You can't add any words. You can't add any punctuation. You can't leave out any words. What do you think Jack Richards said? Egamen, you've missed out a word. Yeah, Alara. Yeah, some of you are not including all the words. You can't miss out any words. Yeah, okay. Yeah. What learners do to achieve learning. Yes, Alpa, but you've missed out an important word. Right, okay, yeah. So it's what learners do to achieve successful learning. So Jack Richards is telling us that a learning strategy is the specific thing that somebody does in order to achieve not learning, but successful learning, yeah? So it's the things that learners do. So very quickly in the chat box, what are the types of things that learners do to achieve successful learning? Give me some examples in the chat box. What do learners do to achieve successful learning? Yeah, repetition is very important. They memorize things. Good, Alpa. Yeah, very, very good. Alem, they make mistakes. Remember what we said earlier about making mistakes. They're not frightened of making mistakes. They're okay with risking failure. Watching, redoing things, transferring knowledge, all of these things are correct. Exactly. So all of the things you're putting in the chat box are, in fact, learning strategies. Let's go back to Vivian Cook, this gentleman here, and let's look specifically now about learning languages. Vivian Cook says this. So Vivian Cook says that people who are good at languages, like yourselves, yeah, those of you in the room who've learned English as a second language or maybe a third language, people who are good at languages might tackle second language learning, L2 learning, in different ways from those who are less good. In other words, they're using different strategies, and possibly using different strategies has actually made them better, more proficient in the L2. Or the last part of what Vivian Cook says, they might behave in the same way, but more efficiently. So there are two things that Vivian Cook is suggesting here. The first one, if you're good at something, of course he mentions languages because he's an ELT expert, but this could be about learning to play the piano or learning to make a chocolate cake or drive a car. It doesn't matter what the subject is or what the learning is. There are probably two ways that learners approach it. Either you have different strategies which work more effectively and therefore your learning becomes better, or you use the same strategies as everybody else, but you actually do it more efficiently. As Sibel says, it's to do with familiarity. The more familiar you are with something, then very often the better that you become at it. So I'm sure my next expert, you'll recognize this gentleman immediately. I'm sure he's spoken to you in Turkey, probably even visited Turkey many times. Maybe Doğrusal has invited him to talk to you or invited him into Turkey. This gentleman here, yeah, it's Jeremy Harmer. And in fact, I was with Jeremy Harmer at a conference in Jeddah in Saudi back in January, just before the lockdown began. And I've actually known Jeremy Harmer for many, 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 many years. So it was great to meet up with him again. But Jeremy Harmer also talks about learning strategies. And he says that strategies come back to the teacher, because students don't know necessarily what learning strategies are. And he says that the teacher has to encourage students to develop learning strategies. And this will actually involve training students to behave in certain ways. So yes, it's up to the student, but actually it needs to come from the teacher. We need to encourage students to develop these learning strategies. And that means training them, if you like, dictating to them, do it like this, because if you do this, you'll be successful. How many times have you said to your students in the classroom, okay, before you do anything, underline the keywords in the question? Have you ever said that to students? Of course you have. So what you're doing is you're helping your student to understand a particular strategy which will lead them to success. So when you're not there to hold their hand, they'll do that automatically. They will automatically underline the key words without even having to think about it. It will become a reaction without any thought going through it. How many times have you said to students, I want you to skim the text first. You don't need to understand every word. Again, you're training your students to understand the type of processes that they should actually be going through, the type of strategies that they should be doing. How many times have you said to your students, make a note in your vocabulary books? How many times have you said, use a dictionary? How many times have you said, check with your partner? All of these are strategies which we are advising the students to use in particular situations. So I'm going to use Jeremy, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, as a student now. And one question he might be asking himself is, what do I actually need to do to answer this particular question? So we need to get our students to be asking themselves questions and then coming up with possible answers. So do I need to skim? Do I need to scan? Do I need to write notes? Or do I need to use online resources? Now, earlier we talked about students having a choice. Vivian Cook mentioned having a choice, and we talked about a menu of things. So this is the menu over here on the left. This is Jeremy Harmer's menu. So number 1 is skim, number 2 is scan, number 3 is write notes, number 4 is use online resources. Which one do I need in order to answer this question in the most effective way? Now, the good learner, the good student, will automatically go, for example, to skim. But the less effective student might scan. In other words, a slightly more in-depth type of reading. But if they're not a very good reader, then that's probably not actually going to help them very much to be successful. The second question Jeremy asks himself is this: how can I understand more when I listen? So again, we need a menu of possible options. So it might be to memorize, it might be to relax and focus more on the question, remove any distractions from around me, stop looking out the window, switch off my phone or whatever it might be, listen for ideas and not just words. So we need students to be self-questioning, to be asking themselves questions based on whatever the task or the problem or the activity is that they're faced with. Okay, so lovely picture of Cambridge here. And again, I want to bring us back to this gentleman. Can you remember his name? Who's this? 101 years old when he passed away. Not Bruner. Yeah, Jerome Bruner. And a second thing I particularly like that Jerome Bruner said, and again, it's very important for what we're talking about today, is that Jerome Bruner also brings in this idea about thinking, which we've been referring to. And he said that thinking about thinking, so us, the educators, thinking about thinking, but also students need to think about thinking. It has to be a principal ingredient of any empowering practice of education. In other words, we need to build in thinking and critical thinking and creative thinking. All of these types of thinking have to be involved in our education if we wish to empower our students. And this brings us to the point where we can now start moving into the future. We've talked a lot about what learning is and what learning strategies are. And so I want to introduce you to this gentleman here over on the right. There's no reason for you to know who it is. Don't worry if you've never seen him or indeed even heard of him. You can see over here on the left, it says OECD. Anybody know what OECD is, what this stands for? You can quickly Google it if you've got your phone handy. Anybody know? Okay, well, the OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this gentleman over on the right, his name is Andreas Schleicher, and he is the director for the Directorate of Education and Skills. And he wrote a paper a few years back, which was called The Case for 21st Century Learning. And he wrote this at the turn of the millennium, just as we were moving into the 21st century. And it's obviously quite a large document, but I've taken some key points from it, which I think are relevant and useful for us today in our webinar this morning. And one of the things he said was this, that a generation ago, teachers could expect that what they taught would last their students a lifetime. So a generation ago, in the classroom, the things that teachers were teaching their students probably were not going to change in a short space of time. The facts, the information were probably going to remain the same. We're not talking now so much about language, although of course language does change over time, but this is a more general comment about education. And he also said that today, because of rapid economic and social change, schools have to prepare students for. And he suggests there are three things that we need to prepare students for. Now, one of them, as somebody wrote in the chat box a little bit earlier. So let's see if you can tell me what the three things are that we have to prepare students for in the future because of rapid economic and social change. I think we can probably also add technological change as well. So the first thing begins with J. This is obviously an easy one. It's not jelly, it's not jam, it's not Jeep, it's jobs. Yeah, it's jobs. But more importantly, not just jobs, as Esma says. Yeah, I think Esma was the lady who mentioned this earlier, but jobs that haven't actually even been created yet. The jobs which are going to appear tomorrow that we don't know about. Even in my lifetime, I can think, 20, 30 years ago of jobs which exist now, which we couldn't have dreamed of that would have existed, that would exist in the future. So the second one is T, and people are saying time and technology. Yeah, it is actually technologies, but technologies that we don't even know about yet, technologies that have not yet been invented. Who knows what they might be? Any ideas very quickly? What technology do you think might be invented in the future that we don't know about now? What would you expect to see around the corner? What's coming next? Flying cars, okay, yeah. Modern past, yeah. Well, I guess we do have robots now, don't we? Tasting food online, that's interesting. I wonder how we could do that. Using the net with our eyes, more distance learning, teletransportation, telepathy, time travel. Yeah, quantum computers, right? Yes, I don't even know what a quantum computer is. Pills instead of food. I hope that never happens, Esma. Can you imagine having a pill instead of food? That would take all the fun out of it. Avatar teachers, unmanned passenger aircrafts. That sounds frightening. Yeah, I mean, you've got loads and loads and loads of ideas. Yeah. And the third one, the P, what do you think the P is? He mentions jobs, he mentions technologies, and P, projects, properties, posts, prospects, places. Jansu has got it. Problems, yeah. And problems that we don't yet know will actually arrive. Poverty, yeah. Some lovely words coming up here. But if we go back to some of those technologies, imagine taking a pill instead of having food. What problems might be associated with that? We don't know, do we? If the technology appears, if the technology is available, until we actually use it, then of course we have no idea what the problems are that will arise from that particular technology. So Schleicher was saying that because everything is changing so quickly nowadays, these are the three things that we really need to consider. The jobs that we don't know about because they haven't been created yet, the technologies that we don't know about because they haven't been invented yet, and the problems that are going to arise because of the new jobs and because of because of the technologies. So these three things put together create enormous challenges for us as educators. Now, maybe some people are sitting there thinking, this has nothing to do with me because I just teach English, or I just teach maths, or I just teach history. So this has got nothing to do with me. But that's not true. As teachers nowadays, we have to embrace all of this. We have to think about the challenges that students are going to be faced with. And Egerman says we've learned lots of new tech because of the pandemic. I guess the tech was there, so it wasn't necessarily new, but maybe it was new to us, and we've had to embrace it and take it on board. And Schleicher goes on to say that if you want to be successful, and I think we have been, we've done exactly this since the pandemic, since COVID arrived in March or whenever it was. We've had to be very, very quick to adapt to this new situation. And he said that success will go to those individuals and those countries that are swift. Swift means quick, fast, to adapt, slow to resist, and open to change. So if we open our doors and we accept the changes, then we will be successful and our students will be successful. So the task of us, the educators and the policymakers, governments, administrations, is to help countries rise to this challenge. So rather than standing back and saying, no, 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 we don't want that, we want to live in the past, we have to embrace, we have to accept and engage with change. And we have to do it quickly. We can't do it slowly. And I think, as many of you are saying in the chat box, these last 5 or 6 months have forced us to make very, very rapid adaptations and changes in the way that we do things. Not just us as teachers, but let's not forget the children that we teach as well. You know, I've been doing lots of work with teachers over the last 4 or 5 months, you know, via webinars, helping teachers and supporting them, which is obviously absolutely critical. But let's not forget that the students are having a hard time of it as well. And of course, as Emine says, the parents are being faced with new challenges as well. So it's not just about us, the educators, it's also about the ones that we're trying to educate. Okay, I've got about 5 minutes, so just a few more things I'd like to cover. This is really a summary of what Schleicher said. He says that a future learner, the learners from the future, they need to be effective. In order to be effective, they need to have strategies. They need to be strategy-based learners. So they need to have that menu that we've spoken about. But they also need to be constantly looking at what they're doing, constantly reflecting, monitoring the learning process, and coming up with responses which are appropriate to that particular point in learning which they're going through. And our students need to understand who they are and what type of learner they are, because if they understand themselves as learners, then they're going to be in a much better position to make their learning process more effective, to make the right choices from that menu that we've referred to. So they need to understand themselves as learners and understand, you know, what knowledge is and the knowledge that they're learning. And of course, they need to be able to apply all of this knowledge, all of this understanding to a more effective and successful performance. Schleicher also says in his conclusions that the future learner, the one who's going to be successful and effective, also needs to think about other people and to care about how other people learn and to support other people in their learning, and to understand that learning is probably better, is probably more effective if it's a social process rather than an individual process. You know, back in the days of classroom based learning, when we were, you know, face to face with our students, how many times did we put students into pairs and groups? probably sometimes just because it seemed like a good idea. But hopefully some of those times there was a real purpose to it. And the purpose was that we wanted learning to become social and we wanted learning to become collective. And if learning is social, if learning is collective, then of course, what can we do? We can learn from each other, not just from the things which are right, but also from others' mistakes. And we can learn from our own mistakes as well. And the last thing that I wanted to point out from Schleicher's conclusion is that we need to accept what we have in front of us and do something about it. There's no point in sitting here and crying about the pandemic and COVID, even though, of course, it's had a serious impact on many of us. But in terms of education, in terms of learning, we need to adapt. We have to do something about it. We have to accept what it is, and we have to come up with new ways of doing things. And maybe the menu, that old menu that we had last year is no longer relevant. Maybe we need a new menu with different strategies. And I think all of us have probably learned lots of new teaching strategies, and our learners have had to come up with a lot of new learning strategies as well in the last few months. Okay, so the University of Cambridge, we want learners, or the university wants to encourage our learners, to encourage students to see what everybody else has seen. That's very important, that we want people to be open-minded about everything that's in front of us. But the more effective student, the more successful student needs to go beyond just seeing and needs to do more of that thinking, which Bruner talked about thinking. So we want students to think what nobody else has thought. So it's not just about seeing and understanding, but it's also thinking beyond. That expression, thinking outside the box, I think is important here. Jalal is saying behind the gate. Yeah, I don't know if that's what you say in Turkish, behind the gate, outside the box, whatever. But yeah, it's thinking differently from other people. So you need to ask yourselves a question now. If we want to create our future learners, what is it that we need to do? What is it that teachers need to do in order to create our future learners? That was supposed to be my final thought, and I was going to close it there, but I have one more final thought, and I'm calling this a final thought because I want to come back to Plato. And I'm showing you Plato again because a couple of years ago I was in Italy, and I was doing a workshop with teachers teaching IGCSE, English as a second language. And we were talking about learner strategies and how to be successful. And I turned around at one point, and on the classroom notice board, there was this picture of Plato. And next to it, there was something written in Italian. And this is what was written obviously in Italian. And Plato wrote these words, not the Italian words, of course, but it had been translated. But he wrote this 2,500 years ago. Anybody like to guess what the meaning is in English? Maybe some of those words you can guess. Emre says, risk is better than discovery. That's very nice. That's very nice. Anybody else? Emine says, know yourself, okay. Emre says, I can speak Italian. That doesn't matter. Maybe you can guess the words. Bello. Yeah, I'm sure you know what bello means. Jalal says, knowledge is good. Yeah. Does rischio sound like an English word? Risk. Yeah, great. Risk. Yeah, yeah. Beautiful discovery following risk. Yeah, you're beginning to get the idea. But what Plato said, actually, this is a translation from a very good Italian friend of mine. He said, this is probably the best translation, that there's a hidden beauty in the risk of discovery. So once again, I just want to remind all of us that, you know, what we're talking about today, we're talking about learning and strategies and taking risk. It's not a new concept. It's not a new idea. These thoughts and ideas have been around for more than 2,000 years. I think maybe today they're slightly more popular than they were. But even 2,500 years ago, Plato was saying that if we take risks, if we're not frightened of failure, then we're very likely to come up we're likely to discover something which is actually very, very beautiful. And I think that the point here is that we will be successful if we're prepared to take risks. Okay, so thank you to all of those who've attended this morning. Thank you to all of my experts on the screen who helped me with this talk this morning. I hope it's been a useful start to your day of webinars today. Doğrusal will tell us if we have time for any questions. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, we have 5 more minutes if you're happy with this.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, are there any questions anybody would like to ask? Lots of thank yous, and I thank you for attending and participating. Lots of thank yous, but no questions. The inspiration works both ways. You inspired me as well. Somebody says they've got all the answers to the questions they wanted. Great, great, great. Do we have a Q&A box?
Yes, we do, actually.
Okay, what's in there?
Shall I read it for you? Or?
Oh, I can see it, but I don't see any questions, actually.
Yeah, no.
But how can we put those? There's a lovely question, actually, from Hassan. He says, we educators try to adapt to technology, and we're supposed to make our students aware of learning can take place at home other than schools. In short, we want them to be self-learners, but how can we prevent them focusing on other things when there is so much diversions online, like games and stuff? Yeah, it's a very good question, isn't it? And I'm not sure I have a particular answer, but I think one of the ways to stop students from going off and looking and doing different things is by keeping them focused through constant changes of activities, a lot of variety in what you're doing online. You may have had a 2-hour class face-to-face with students, but you can't have a 2-hour class online. It doesn't work like that. You can't simply do online what you were doing in the classroom. So you need different approaches and different strategies. And I would say one of the key things is lots of changes and lots of breaks so that students don't get bored and distracted. I've been doing a lot of online work myself, and I've realized doing things online takes actually longer than doing it face-to-face. And because it takes longer, you do actually need more breaks and more changes of activity. So I hope that's answered that particular question. Marjan is asking if we're going to have classes again. Of course we will. This situation can't stay forever, can it? I think we need to be positive and hope that you know, around the corner we'll be back in the classroom. Maybe we'll be doing more online, maybe more blended learning. You know, some in the classroom, some online, and I think that's actually a good thing anyway. But yeah, I can't believe this situation will be with us forever. I think we'd all go crazy. And Umut says, hope to have an IGCSE session for the next webinar. Sure, speak to Doğrusal. I'm sure he can organize it. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? What is a way to motivate a student who is not into learning specifically for children? I don't think there's any one particular way. Behnas, I think it's all about engagement, trying to find things which, you know, students are interested in. And I do believe, as I was just saying to the previous question, variety and, you know, constant changes of pace and activity. I think these are the only ways that we can expect students to be motivated. Giving students, you know, particular things to do which supports their learning, challenges the areas which they're strong in. I think all of those things are ways that we can help to motivate students. What do we do to distractions by parents while teaching online? I don't really know. Tell them to go away. Tell them to go in a different room. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Or maybe teach them as well. Maybe get them to partner with the children. Yeah. Okay, Doğrusal, is it time for break?
Yes. Yeah? Thank you very much, Peter, for being with us today and sharing your expertise with our audience. I hope you all enjoyed our first session. Now we have a 40 minutes of break, and please be with us for our second session, which will be delivered by Ben Knight at 11:30. Enjoy your break. Thank you. The second speaker is Ben Knight from UK. Ben Knight will be delivering a session on how can English teachers help their students become great collaborators. Before we start our session with Ben Knight, I would like to give a brief information about him. Ben Knight works for Cambridge University Press as the Director of ERT Research and Teacher Development. His responsibilities include ensuring that high-quality research underpins the learning materials, curriculum development, and teacher support that CUP provides. Ben has taught, worked in several countries all around the world, and today he is with us. Our session with Ben Knight will be 45 minutes and 5 minutes for Q&A. After that, we will have another coffee break for 40 minutes. Enjoy your second session at Cambridge Day Online Turkey event. Over to you, Ben.
Okay, thanks very much, Doğrusal. Okay, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be talking to you. It's a particular pleasure to be talking to teachers in Turkey because that is one of my favorite countries, and I particularly love the interaction with teachers from Turkey. I feel there's a lot of enthusiasm for professional development and to improve the way that you teach, and I think that means your students are lucky, very lucky people. So today what I wanted to talk about was really how you as English teachers can help your students develop their collaboration skills. And what I was going to do was go through these topics. So first of all, we're going to look at what do we mean by collaboration? What are collaboration skills so that you can understand what you're trying to develop in your students. Then we're just going to look at why that's important. Why should you take time in your English classes to develop these skills? Then we're going to look at examples of what you can do to help your students become collaborators. And we're going to look at how we can integrate that into English language lessons so that you're not taking time away from teaching English, but you're developing these skills at the same time. And then lastly, because of the situation we're in, a lot of you are having to teach online. And so we're going to look at how does collaboration work when you're working in an online context. So those things we're going to cover. I hope that's good. I hope that's okay. And I hope you're all saying yes, 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 because that's what we're going to do. Okay. Next, the first thing we're going to look at is trying to understand really what is collaboration, because we all have a general sense of it. And if I say this, that it's working, oops, let me just get the video out of the way. Yeah. If I say this, it's people working together to achieve a shared goal. I think you understand that. It has to be more than one person. It has to be 2 or 3 people at least. And they need to have this shared goal and that they're working together on it. So that we understand. But what are the skills that you need to do that well? Well, first of all, your students have to take responsibility for their own contribution to the group task. So they have to contribute, each of them. Secondly, they need to be working to encourage effective group interaction. They need to be doing things which help the group work together. Thirdly, they need to be working on the way that they share the tasks in a group activity. They have to manage that well. And fourthly, they need to be thinking about how can they push the activity towards a completion? How do they achieve the goal of the activity? So those are the 4 broad areas of skill that they need. We're going to break that down a little bit more so that you can understand it more clearly. Now, this is what we've been doing in Cambridge, and I'll tell you a bit more about the background to this. But if we take those 4 areas, and then we think about what are the actual skills that you need. So the responsibility for contributing to a group task. Well, really, there are 2 bits to that. The first bit is that you need to be actively contributing to a task. And secondly, you need to be able to take on different roles. Sometimes you're the person who's taking notes. Sometimes you're the person who is checking time and progress. Sometimes you're the person who's trying to organize the whole thing. So depending on what you're doing, you have to be able to take on those different roles. When we talk about trying to encourage this effective group interaction, there are a number of things our students need to be able to do. They need to be able to listen and respond respectfully. They need to establish the way that they're going to work together. Are they going to go off in separate ways and bring things back together? Or are they going to spend some time talking through what they're going to do and how they're going to do it? The third thing is they need to be good at engaging and supporting others, not just thinking about themselves, but supporting the others and bringing other people in. When we look at the third area, which is sharing the tasks in a group activity, well, there's really two bits to that. First of all, you have to agree what needs to be done. And secondly, you need to be managing the distribution of tasks, who is doing what. And then when we look at the fourth area here, we can see this is about task completion. And the first thing is, well, just making sure that you're progressing towards the goal. So what do we have to do? Are we progressing towards it? But we also, our students need to be able to identify issues and challenges. In some ways, issues and challenges is just a nice way of saying problems. So really, they have to identify problems. And then they have to be good at resolving those problems. So if there's a disagreement, for example, that might be the problem. How do they resolve that? So when we think about when we're trying to make our students to be great collaborators, these are the kind of skills that we want them to be able to develop. This is what we're trying to do. But of course, this looks quite different when you're talking about primary or secondary or university students. These are general skills, but what do they look like at each of the stages of education? Well, one of the things we've been working on in Cambridge is been trying to think about describing these at each of the stages. For example, if we look at primary level and we think of one of those areas, which was encouraging effective group interaction, that's getting the group to work together well. If we look at, we identified one of the skills there is that you have to engage and support the others. If you're in a group, you can't you can't just work on your own. You have to get others to work with you. So how do you do that? That's the component skill. At primary level, what we do is we produce these can-do statements. And the can-do statements describe the behaviors that you want your students to be able to show, to develop. And we make those can-do statements suitable for each of the stages. So there are different can-do statements for primary, secondary, pre-primary, kindergarten, and university. So and also the other thing we do is we give some example language. What is the language that you might expect a primary school student to be using in English when they are engaging and supporting others? So let me give you some examples. Engaging and supporting others. Well, the first thing that you would expect, you would hope that your students would be able to do at primaries, that they are able to offer help to others when they need it. And you also want your students to be able to encourage others to share ideas about the topic. So these are two can-do statements that you're looking for your students to show these behaviors. And the kind of language that they might use, I mean, it depends, because even at primary school, there's a range of levels, but this is the kind of thing you might expect. You might expect them to be able to say, "Can I help?" Similarly, to encourage others to come in and share their ideas, "What do you think?" So this is language that we're looking for, but it's also language that we can teach them to help them demonstrate these skills. Let me take another example. This one is for secondary. And here we're looking at managing the sharing of tasks in a group activity. That was the area. And we said that the first step to sharing tasks is agreeing what needs to be done. So that's the component skill. Then we think about the can-do statements of the example language for secondary. And for can-do statements, well, they need to be able to clarify the requirements of a task. So a good collaborator, when they first start, is they think, what really do we need to do? Did I understand that correctly? And secondly, they need to be able to list out the steps necessary to achieve the task. And then, so example language, there are lots of different ways you can do this, but for example, it says we should do this. We should draw a picture or something. And then listing out the steps. First we have to, then we have to. So this is the kind of language which is useful for doing these skills when you're working in a group on a collaborative task. So I hope that's all clear. Now, as I mentioned, this is part of a bigger project, and this project is called the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. And in this framework, we're trying to take all the life competencies or life skills, sometimes called 21st century skills, and try and analyze and understand better what do they really mean and how can we teach them when we're teaching English. And we've produced a number of booklets which help you as teachers to understand what they mean and how you can develop them as teachers among your students. So there are 8 booklets there, and you can find them all if you type in cambridge.org/CLCF. Can I ask you, write it down now, but don't start searching now, because if you start searching now, you're going to find them, you're going to start reading those booklets, and you're going to stop listening to me. So just write it down at this moment, and then later you can follow up and start searching for it. cambridge.org/CLCF. And what does CLCF stand for? It stands for Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. Okay. So I can't see you, so I can't see if you are following me or if you're looking puzzled or confused or if I'm speaking too quickly or too slowly. I'm hoping that it's all making sense and that you are following. I can see some people putting up hands, but I can't really look at that because there's 400 of you on this, and I can't start doing that. So I'm just going to trust that you can hear me and understand me. Okay, so the next question then is why? Why should you think about this? If your job is to teach English, why should you think about this? Well, I think there are some reasons which are good within the classroom for you as a teacher. First of all, the students, they're getting help and support from other students. Sometimes they will ask things from other students if they don't understand, which they won't ask to you. So getting them to work collaboratively as a team is really good. Secondly, it reduces the pressure on individuals when they're doing activities, because learning a language is really tough. It's difficult, it's stressful, and the more that you can get them to work together and reduce that stress, the better. The third reason I would give is that it helps them to develop self-management skills, and that leads to learner autonomy. Now, it might seem a bit strange to say working together is developing self-management skills, but it's really taking the teacher out of the interaction, and it's making the student more in control. They're still working together, but they're more in control than when the teacher is managing the interaction. So they're having to start to think about their contribution, the way that they organize things, the way that they do things. And that's the step towards learner autonomy, which we know is critical for people being successful in their learning. And then lastly, it's just like any group activity, it gives them more chance. For each student in the class gets more chance to speak and to interact in English. Okay. Okay, so yes, another point here is I was talking about why collaboration is good in the classroom, but it's also good beyond the classroom. And as teachers, we're always thinking we want to help our students to develop for the future, to get the careers and to be successful beyond the classroom. And so it's useful for us to think, well, what do employers look for when they're recruiting and promoting people? And this is a bit of research. This is from a report from the USA where they asked thousands of employers, what are the most important skills that you look for when you are recruiting people or when you are promoting them? What are the most important skills? Number one, ability to work in a team structure. That's the most important thing they feel when they're looking at their employers or recruiting. But even if you look at the other ones, here, ability to make decisions and solve problems, ability to communicate verbally with people, these are skills which they are developing when you're putting them into collaborative group tasks. So you're helping them work in a team, but you're helping a lot of these other skills, ability to plan, obtain information. 6, 7, and 8 may be a bit more specialized. 9, because often you'll do a group activity and they have to write a report at the end of it. And 10, ability to sell and influence others. Well, they're not selling things usually, but they are trying to influence people within that group. So when you are setting up these collaborative activities, you are helping them develop the skills that they will need in their future life. And I feel I want to emphasize this with teachers, because a lot of teachers are unusual in that they are not really having to work collaboratively. I know there are exceptions, and some schools and some teachers do work as a team, but for a lot of teachers, they work quite individually. But you need to know, if that's your situation, that that's unusual in the world. Most people are having to work in a team, and their ability to work in a team is what makes the difference between success and not success. So these are really important skills for your students. Okay, so one of the things I think that's really important to establish, to think about when you're trying to encourage collaboration skills, is to create ground rules. Because in a way, what you're trying to do is trying to help them develop new behaviors. And this is the same with all areas of education. When you're trying to develop new behaviors and habits, it's good to have these rules which make it very consistent. Having consistency in what you expect from your students is really the key to success. And you can do that. You can approach this in different ways. You can try and establish these. You can set them yourselves as the teacher. Say, here are the ground rules. Or you can work with the students. You can help them to develop their own rules. Normally, when you're looking at ground rules for collaboration, there tend to be 3 areas that you want to cover. First of all, people have got to contribute. Everyone has got to contribute. Secondly, there's got to be a sharing of ideas. You've got to be working together and sharing what you're doing and sharing the work. And thirdly, there's got to be some respect in the way that you work together. And the ground rules tend to be around those 3 areas. I want to share this example, which is from a school called School 21 in London. And it's just a nice example where the teacher encouraged the students to come up with their own rules. Obviously, the teacher was shaping this, but the students worded them. And I love them. Everyone should have a chance to talk. Everyone's ideas should be carefully considered. Every member of the group should be asked, what do you think? And why do you think that? Look and listen to the person talking. And after discussion, agree what to do. So these are great. And I've put the address of School 21 there because, again, not now, but later, check it out. It's a really lovely school. We don't normally give numbers to our schools, but the 21 means 21st century skills. It's a school which is really putting the emphasis on these wider skills. And it's a really beautiful school. Okay. So what I'm going to do is look at some kind of more specific examples here. And now we're looking at primary. And How am I doing for time? I'm doing okay. Okay, so primary, and what we're going to do is, on this particular example, we're going to focus on one aspect of collaboration. That's the taking turns. That's one of the things they have to learn, particularly at primary. Okay, and so we're looking here at a particular example. This activity comes from a course, Cambridge course called Power Up. And in this project, they call them missions, which is, makes it much more exciting. And the students, they're going to have to give a presentation about a town which they are creating. And they're going to describe it and present it to the other students. And then as a class, they're going to vote for the best town. So that's the overall mission project. What we're going to do is look at the first part of that, is that when they have to work together to come up with the town, to draw it, create it. And what we're going to do is to focus on one aspect of working together, and that's taking turns. So we're going to start, first of all, by making sure the students have got the language for taking turns. So we're just going to check, first of all, this might vary for your students depending on their levels and their skills and the situation, but it's my turn, it's your turn, it's his turn, it's her turn. So that's basic, or you first, or after you. So some basic phrases that they need for taking turns. Now this is obviously teaching them English, it's really important, but it's also teaching them to be thinking about taking turns. And then they have to explain that they will, then obviously as a teacher, you have to explain that they will draw a town. This is explaining the task, and they've got to choose 4 or 5 places to include, where to put them and to draw them. And then you're going to do probably going to pick out a group to demonstrate what they have to do. They're going to maybe pick out 3 students, take them through the first step, and you're encouraging them to use the phrases for taking turns. And what they're doing is they're doing the first step, which is deciding which places they're going to put in their town. They're going to choose 4 or 5 places, maybe a cinema, maybe a school, maybe a shop. They're going to decide that. And then that's just done in front of the others so that the others can see how they need to work together, what they have to do and how they should work together using that language as well. Then you're going to split them into groups, and we're going to talk a little bit later about that, but personally I feel it's best as a teacher to decide that in advance, to decide which groups they're going to be, and personally I think it's good to have 4 or 5 in a group. Sometimes it can be 3, that's okay. More than 5 tends not to work. And then you've got the stages here, and notice, so they're going to decide the places, they're then going to decide where they're going on the map and who's going to draw each one, and then they're going to kind of complete that drawing. So that's your first part of the whole mission. So what we're doing is they're doing the mission, they're using their English to do this, and obviously you would have previously taught them all the language they need for the different places on the map. But you're also helping them to think about taking turns and working together. Okay. Now we're going to look at another example. This is at secondary level. And here we're going to focus on roles in the collaboration in the group. And this is a really important one. I think when I've seen group work and collaboration not work very well, it often feels like it would have been better if there had been roles given to the students. It tends to control it more. And in some ways, what this tells us, it tells me anyway, when I look at this, is that as adults, we have learned how to collaborate, but we have to realize that our students haven't learned it. It's something they've got to learn. And so we have to take them through the steps, each year by year, improving them. And one of the things that they will struggle with is understanding the different roles. So for me, it's worth, this is something you're going to build up with each class, their understanding of the roles. And you might think about what are the roles that you might have in this. I mean, I tend to think of these as the 5 main ones. There's someone who's got to kind of be the leader or the organizer, and they're just making sure that things are shared out, that people are contributing, and that things are happening that need to be done for the task. You want someone who takes on the role of note taker. It's useful to have someone who's a timekeeper, because especially when they're younger, they're not looking at the clock. And you might want to have someone who's going to present the results to everyone else. And you might have a checker, someone who's just making sure that you are actually following the instructions, just checking back. Are we supposed to do it that way? Are we supposed to do it another way? Now, of course, everybody is a contributor, not just in these roles, but if you can assign these roles, it makes the collaboration work better. You are training them in the roles. That's what I was saying. And also I feel that until you feel quite confident about them and their understanding of roles, it's best to assign the roles either in advance or when you're there, but make sure that everyone is clear about their roles. Okay, so we're looking at a particular activity here. This is from a course called Uncover, for secondary students, lower secondary, and they are planning a special event, and they've already had a lesson which is all about language of food, preparing food, and special occasions, I think birthdays or festivals. So they've got the language, and really they're practicing using the language in a communication situation. And that's what this is. They're going to come up with a special meal, and they're going to decide what and where, when, and who. So we're going to look at this really from the point of view of the roles. And so the first step here is deciding the groups and roles in advance. That's how I would do it. It may depend on your students and how you approach things. And I would look for 4 or 5. And if you can only have 4, perhaps drop the checker. I would make sure that they understand what their roles are and the different ways of doing this. But personally, I quite like to use a matching task, and I'm just going to click onto the next slide. Yep. So something like this, where you've got the roles and what they do, and they've just got to go through this, and it just reinforces what each of the roles are. Do I need to go through this with you? I'm not sure if I do, but check. Yeah, maybe I'd quickly go through. Checker, make sure that you're following instructions. Organizer, which one is organizer? It's E. And note taker is C. And timekeeper is A. And presenter is B. So that's your kind of just your matching task. So going back here, you made sure they understand their roles, explain that basically what the task is. They're going to decide what, where, when, who for this special event with a meal. Then again, you want to do a little stage first just to check that they are doing things in the way that you want them to do. So first of all, the first step is to decide which event. So is it a festival? Is it someone's birthday? Is it graduation ceremony? What kind of event? And you're just going to give them 3 minutes to do this. And you're checking at this point that each person is doing their role in that little step of the task. And that's just reinforcing, do they understand how the collaboration works? Then you can move them on to the next stages, that completing the table and then preparing their presentation. So I'm not going through the rest of the task. Obviously, in this case, it's in the book, and how you would get them to present, etc., etc. What I'm really focusing on here is using this task as a way of improving the way that they take on roles and use those roles in a collaboration activity. Okay. Okay, now this third example is really aimed for students at university level, could also be used at higher secondary. And it's focusing on another aspect here of collaboration, that's agreeing and disagreeing respectfully. And this is a really nice activity which comes from a course called Unlock. And I know students love this activity because what they are doing is they are responsible for a university scholarship, and they're going to look at a number of applications of applicants for that scholarship, and they're going to make a decision about who gets the scholarship. And it's a really nice activity. Now, part of this is that the applicants who are applying for the scholarship are studying different subjects. So one of the first discussion questions is, well, which of those subjects is most important? And that's what we're going to look at now, that first discussion. Yeah, so this is it. So in this particular activity, they've got 5 applicants, and each of them is studying a different subject: hotel management, medicine, Chinese, mechanical engineering, law. Which one of those is going to make the greatest contribution to society, and which will make the smallest contribution, and why? And I can guarantee you'll get lots of different opinions on this, and a lot of debate and discussion. Now, one of the things here is we want to help them to be able to express agreement and disagreement respectfully. And this, you know, we know this as in work, it's very important, but even at university, they have to learn to be, to talk about sometimes difficult things, and to create a good atmosphere by being respectful in the way that they agree and disagree. So in this course, we've got some language which we're teaching them, using modal verbs, like it may not be the ideal course for you, apologizing, sorry, but I have to disagree, or I'm afraid, I don't think the same. And then saying you recognize someone's point of view, and then adding but. Yes, but. Now these are just polite and a little bit formal in the way that they are done. We might add more language here about agreeing and disagreeing. So here's a little activity which is just getting them to think more about the language they can use. Some of these are more formal, some are more informal. I don't think I need to go through these. You can see in the course book what they are. Okay, so you've kind of given them the language, but before you throw them into the collaboration task, you want to build up that language skill first. So in this case, they're given a kind of intermediary task, which is they are student A, student B in pairs. They're given opinions, and the other person has to disagree. So they're not really having to think too much about it. Their opinions are given to them, but it's just a way of practicing that language they've just been given. So then they're ready to use that language in the real communication, the real collaboration activity. But there's one more step before that. One of the important things about when we're talking, especially when we're trying to be polite to people, is our intonation. We know that it's very easy to offend someone with the wrong intonation. And so in this case, one of the ways that we express disagreement more politely is with a certain amount of uncertainty. And so this activity looks at pronunciation, the kind of rising intonation when we are uncertain, and then when we're strongly certain of something, the kind of falling intonation. And they can practice saying the same sentence with certain information or uncertain information. And I think it's a really nice dimension to the way that we express disagreement in a respectful way. So I've done all the language practice. Then so you're getting them into groups. Again, I would do that in advance. You're checking instructions. That tends to be where it goes wrong. They've forgotten the instructions. You're checking the language points, which they've just done, and you are checking their roles. You're setting a clear time limit, and then you're making sure that each group presents results at the end. Okay. Yeah, this is something I want to add here, is that one of the things we're trying to get them to think about and develop their collaboration skills. And one thing that you can do, which is quite good for this, is to get them to reflect on their collaboration skills. So you might give them just this little quiz, 4 questions. And if you're on if you're doing this online, of course, you can just create a little poll for them, or in a classroom, you can do it, whatever option you've got. It might be on the whiteboard, for example. And you just want them to answer these questions, 1 to 5, strong no, strong yes. Did you use the phrases for disagreeing respectfully? Did everyone in your group contribute to the discussion? Did everyone agree with the result? Was it a good discussion? So what you're doing is, of course, you're doing this in English, so you're practicing their English, but you're also making them think about the way that they work together. Okay, so let me just 10 top tips for collaboration. And I've mentioned quite a lot of these. Establish rules for group activities generally. This is behavior you're trying to establish. Choose a task that needs collaboration. Again, I've seen this go wrong where people come up with a task which you can collaborate on, but you can also do without collaborating. And then students tend to take the easy option and just do it individually. So it has to require a collaboration. You need very clear instructions. You need to keep checking all the time, asking your students to repeat back the instructions. Because as soon as you put them into their groups, half of them will have forgotten. You need to prepare the groups in advance, I think. You need to assign roles or make sure they've got their roles. You need to focus on one collaboration. Well, you don't need to. I advise you to focus on one collaboration skill for each big activity. So we talked about roles or taking turns or disagreeing respectfully. Choose one thing to focus on. Teach them the language that they need. Set lots of time limits for each step. Do an example first that they can see. And then feedback. So you as a teacher might feedback or ask them to reflect on their collaboration. Those are my top 10 tips. And now how am I doing for time? I'm doing okay, actually. Okay. So what about in this context of online collaboration? And this, maybe you have similar scenes here where you're using Zoom and you've got your panel of students there. I think in this one, I think it's a show and tell activity where it's geography, I think, and they're sharing pictures of rocks they've found at home. And it works really well, Zoom and other platforms for this. Now, in some ways, all the things that I was saying before, the 10 tips apply just the same for online as for in the classroom. So I think all of them apply. But there are some issues that you have with online, which you have to take into account. First of all, you can't see so well sometimes what's going on, especially if you put them into groups. You're not in all of the groups all the time. So you have to be much more careful about instructions and organization. I feel that when teachers do collaboration online, they're having to check the instructions more times. They show them on the screen. And for example, one thing you might do is when you put the instructions on the screen is you might ask them to take a screenshot of those instructions so that when you move on, they've still got the instructions on their phone. Obviously, that depends on age as well. That you need to really break it probably into smaller steps and tighter management. So if things are not quite working, it's not a disaster. And then thirdly, really, there are technical skills which you need in order to manage breakout rooms. And if you're a teacher who's having to teach online, you just really have to invest that time in working out how do you set up breakout rooms, how do you assign students to a breakout room, how do you put time limits on it, how do you bring them back. All those things, those are just classroom management skills in an online environment that you need to invest some time in. So this here I'm really spelling it out a bit more clearly, that there are some online classroom rules, things about it might be about when they put mute on or not, when they can switch off the video. If you allow them switch off the video, that's often asking for trouble. So you need to have rules which probably apply just for online activities. You need to be much clearer about instructions. So I just mentioned earlier the screenshot of instructions and to keep checking with them, setting time limits. The objective, so by objective, I mean, what's the point of the whole activity, not the steps they need to go through, but what's the point? What at the end do you want them to do? What do you want them to be able to achieve at the end of it? And I think that's really important. Students will understand the steps, but they don't really understand what it's for. Breakout rooms, really useful. I think they work really well. You as a teacher can go in and see them to join any of the breakout rooms. I think if you're not using breakout rooms, you must. If you have the technology. Obviously, if you don't, there are alternatives, and I know people have found other ways of collaborating through using WhatsApp groups and Google Docs and different techniques. But if you do have a platform with breakout rooms, I think it's the best way. Prepare groups in advance. For younger kids, often you might need their parents to be helping in some way, to be understanding what's going on. That's often critical for young kids. Okay. So, all right, sorry, the screen went blank for a moment. Our goal. So what are we trying to achieve here? I think it's important to reflect that we're trying to do two things at the same time. On the one hand, we're trying to teach the children how to collaborate. They don't automatically know how to. As adults, we have learned it. And one of the things we always do as teachers is to understand how to break up active skills, which we have learned as adults, but children are still learning. So we need to understand the different elements of collaboration, and we need to teach children consciously how to collaborate. But the second thing we're doing as teachers is creating those learning experiences and learning opportunities where they can develop their collaboration skills while learning English. So it's that balance we're trying to get. Teach them to collaborate, create these opportunities to develop collaboration while they're learning English. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. I think I've finished a minute or two early, which is good for you if you have questions. So, okay, we're moving on to any questions. And let me see how this is going to be done. So there is a Q&A section. If you've got questions, if you put them there, that's where I'm looking now. Okay, so Sibel or Shibel, I'm not sure. How can we do collaborative activities effectively online? Well, you might have asked that before I kind of got to those slides. I mean, I've seen this happen, and I think it can work well. It is this, to me, it's many of the same things that work for classroom collaboration, all about having very clear instructions, having roles, doing an example activity before you put them into the groups, being clear about what the end answer is. So all of those general rules apply, but they need to be ratcheted up. You need to increase some of the control on it, and that you need to do double the work in terms of checking the instructions, they've understood the instructions, making sure they can see the instructions, and also taking it into smaller steps. And from a technology point of view, as I said, I think breakout rooms are good, but I don't know, there's so many different technical options which are open to different people. As I said, I've seen people do things with WhatsApp groups to share information, but they tend to be a little bit less synchronous when you're doing that. They're collaborating, but it's more about sharing asynchronously. I hope that's a term that I'm not using, a technical term that you're not aware of, but it's synchronously is when they're talking together, and asynchronously is when they're working together, but they're sending things between each other in order to come up with an end result. Number 2, could you recommend some good activities that could help students to learn more about collocation? Okay, so I'm hoping that wasn't something, an autocorrect on the typing. So collocation, not collaboration. Collocation is the way that words come together. I mean, that's really a vocabulary task. So I would look at we have a number of vocabulary in use books which are really good for collocation. Okay. Now I'm looking at, during group tasks, my primary students often start speaking Turkish while discussion, even if their English level is good enough and I presented all the language. How can I avoid it? I feel like there is no use, and I always go, no Turkish please, while observing them. Okay, so you want them to collaborate and you want them to use English. Personally, I feel we can be tolerant of this. It's not a complete waste if they're going into Turkish at times. So obviously if they're only speaking in Turkish, then that's a problem. But if people are using Turkish, perhaps because they're not quite sure of the instructions, or they've just got to a point where their English has not quite got there, then I wouldn't worry too much about that. They are developing their English, they're developing their collaboration skills. They're not going to get to there in one step. So I think not to get too worried about some Turkish coming in there. If they're not using any English, then I think you need to go back to what is to the ground rules and really establish. And I think if that's happening, I would break it down into much smaller steps, making sure, because it's possible that they've been overwhelmed by the task, and that's why they've gone back to Turkish. Not all the students are the same levels. Even in face-to-face, it's hard to make them attend activities. What's your advice to make students who don't want to attend the lesson? Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question. I mean, if they really don't want to attend, you know, that is about your whole school management activity. But I think if we're talking about collaboration specifically, I think one of the things is that they need to understand why it's a good thing to be doing. And it is a slight risk when we're doing a collaboration activity and we say they're going to draw a town and they're going to present that town and they're going to vote on which one. Some students might feel, well, that's not important, it's not part of the exam, or something like that. And so you, as a teacher, you have to get across to them what the value of this is. And it is partly talking about, if they're learning English to talk to others, they have to be practicing English talking to others. And also that collaboration, getting across to them the idea that working together is something really important in life, and that's what you are doing here. You are helping them to become better at working together. So sometimes you do have to step back and talk about what is the point of the activity. Good examples of collaboration activities. You see, I wouldn't take it in that way. I think any collaboration, any activities which require people to work together, which are kind of project-based, are going to be good. I think what is important is that there's a real need for them to work together. So if, for example, if you have a discussion, there's got to be something which you know people are going to disagree about. If they don't care about it, then it's not really going to work. So it's got to be a topic which you know there's going to be disagreement about. If they're producing something together, it's got to be something where it requires different people to produce different things. Again, you don't want something where one student who's more able than the others can just do it all themselves. So you've got to think of activity projects. And I think projects are generally the best thing. They're producing something. It might be you know, a poster or a presentation or something, but there needs to be clear that there are different parts of it from different students. I'm just seeing if there are any other questions. I think you set rules for class so no one speaks any other language. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm hesitating a little bit to say exactly what the right thing to do is here, because each school has its own set of rules. But I think my own feeling is that we don't have to be 100% speaking English in an English language class. That there are times when you do want to allow students to make sure that they've understood the task, that you want to make sure they're not getting stuck or going in the wrong direction, or they're not completely confused. Or you might want to be talking about what's the value in them working together, and that might be something that's difficult to get across in English. So I feel there can be some tolerance of using the first language in an English language classroom, especially for project group work where they're going to have to take responsibility for it themselves. You're not managing every action. How can we do speaking and writing activities online for university students? Well, there are a number of things that you can do for collaboration. I assume you're talking about collaborative speaking and writing. And they are generally trying to produce something together where people are producing different parts of it. So if you're going to do they're going to work together, a group of 4 of them to give a presentation. If you can make sure that there are, for example, 4 issues, questions to be addressed in that presentation, and that each student is going to deal with each of those questions, that can help. Similarly, with a writing activity, a collaborative writing, you might have a structure which is, introduction. If it's an argument essay, introduction, the arguments for, then the arguments against, and then the conclusion, and you can divide those between a group of 4 to produce. Do you think, how do we, sorry, this question's moving quickly. Do you think having and using dictionary for a student in primary school is necessary? Well, I wouldn't say it's necessary, but it can be a useful skill. I mean, these days, students are more likely to be using an online dictionary, and I think it's quite useful for them to understand how to use it. Of course, the question might be, are we talking about bilingual or monolingual dictionaries? I mean, I would recommend using a monolingual dictionary. That's one where they can find the word and the explanation is in English as well. Because there are so many problems when you start having bilingual dictionaries. People just start looking word by word translations. But I think monolingual dictionaries are good to start. I mean, secondary is where I would normally think of dictionary skills. I think I've overrun, and Doğrusal is not interrupting me, but he's probably screaming at me silently. So I think I'm going to come to a close here. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your really interesting questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to go through them all. There's just too many there. But thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop talking now, and I hope that Doğrusal will come in.
I would like to thank you, Ben, for being with us today and sharing your expertise on students becoming great collaborators. I hope you all enjoyed our second session. We have finalized the halfway of our event, and now we have 1 hour, 40 minutes lunch break. Please be with us for our third session, which will be delivered by Penny Wu at 2 p.m. She will be delivering you all 20 tips on teaching vocabulary. Enjoy your lunch break. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great break, and now our third session is about to start with Penny Wu. Penny Wu will be sharing 20 tips on teaching vocabulary with you all. Before we start, I would like to share a brief background information about our international speaker. Penny Wu has 30 years experience as an English teacher and taught MA courses. She has presented papers at TESOL, IATEFL, and various other English teacher conferences worldwide. She has published a number of articles and was for 10 years the editor of the Cambridge Handbook for Language Teachers series. And all her books were published by Cambridge University Press. As all other sessions, our session with Penny Wu will be 45 minutes, followed by a 5-minute Q&A and a 40 minutes break afterwards. Enjoy your session with Penny Wu. Over to you, Penny.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat box. Can you all make sure that it's directed to all panelists and attendees at the bottom, not just panelists? so that everyone will be able to see what you've written, not just me, but everybody. Anyway, nice to be here, and I hope you'll enjoy my session. I hope you'll find it helpful. I've got really interested in recent years on teaching vocabulary. I published a book on it with Cambridge University Press called Vocabulary Activities. But since then, I've extended my interest. And this session is really practical tips on teaching vocabulary. Some of them you'll find a bit surprising. Some of them will be fairly obvious. But in any case, I hope that you'll come out of this session richer. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box. So if you have things to ask as we're going, please feel free to do so. One other thing I'd like to say is that on the last slide of this presentation, I have my email. So if any of you want a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, you just send me an email and I'll send it to you. And that also is if you want any references to the research on which some of the items are based and so on. Okay, let's go. So on teaching vocabulary, the tips are basically to add to, not replace what you're doing already. So I'm not saying always do this and stop doing what you're doing, but this is added ideas which you might use to enrich your own, what you're already doing to teach vocabulary. Okay, tip number one then is spend a lot of class time vocabulary teaching. Vocabulary teaching is so important, partly because there's a sheer amount of the students need to know. People don't always appreciate quite how many words and phrases you need to know in order to function in English, even at an A2, B1 level. And it's really important to teach it, to spend time vocabulary teaching. I would say something like a quarter to a third of class time devoted to vocabulary, of course, within teaching of skills and texts and so on, but focusing on vocabulary, making sure the students are learning new vocabulary. They do not just pick it up. I remember when I first started teaching, and I was teaching in the heyday of the audiolingual method, and my teacher trainer told me, oh, don't bother to teach them vocabulary, just teach them the grammar, they'll pick up the vocabulary as they go. And that is so not true. They do not normally pick up vocabulary, particularly in a situation like you are in Turkey and I am in Israel, where most of the time outside the classroom, they're speaking another language. I'm going to pause for a moment and make sure I'm clear. Are you hearing me okay? Is my accent okay? Is the speed okay? All okay, all okay, all okay. Right, great. If there are any problems, send a message and I'm sure Doğrusal will deal with it. Okay, the sheer amount, I said, the research says, thank you for all your messages. The research says that you need to know about 8,000 word families in order to understand unsimplified reading text. And 8,000 word families is a lot more words. I've written here about 20,000, something like that. 8,000 word families. A word family is like you have the word act, so it includes things like activity, inactive, acting, and so on. So it's a lot more words, and it's, if you do the arithmetic and work out how many lessons you're teaching a year and how many years you teach English, it works out as quite a lot of tens of words you need to teach every week if you're going to get through them all, which is mission impossible, but it does mean that we need to spend as much time as we can to teach as much as we can new words and expressions in lessons. Learning new vocabulary from extensive reading is very slow. Extensive reading is important, but the research indicates that you only learn about 1 word per 1,000 you read, okay, which is very, very little. So it's very slow. It's okay if you're reading in your mother tongue because you're reading an enormous amount of text, but if you're reading in the foreign language, you're certainly not reading more than 200, 300 words in a text, and it's very, very slow just to pick it up. your students don't read very much in their mother tongue, if I'm judging by my own students in Israel, and in English, obviously, even less. And link to this tip number 2, review again and again. Again, the research indicates we need to encounter a word 6 to 16 times in order to remember it. It varies, of course, according to how difficult the word is, whether you've got a similar word in Turkish or not, whether it's short and easy or long and difficult. But this is about the number of times you need to re-encounter a word. It's no use just teaching a word once and expecting the students to remember it. So recycle as many times as you can. Okay, we can't do it 16 times. It's just not possible in the lesson time we have. But even 2, 3, 4 times is important to try to manage. So on a practical level, some useful routines then. If you teach vocabulary at the beginning of the lesson, then have a quick reminder at the end of what you've taught them. Even that is already a quick recycle which will help them remember. And start the next lesson by saying, how many could you remember? How many of the words we taught can you remember? And let me remind you of the ones that you don't remember. So very, very quick routines which can help them consolidate the memory of the new items. Tip 3, vocabulary is not just single words. It also includes multi-word items, which are called all sorts of things in literature. They're called phrases, they're called lexical phrases, they're called chunks, they're called lexical chunks, they're called expressions, etc., etc., all sorts of, you'll find lots more. But what it means is an item made up of more than one word, which actually conveys a single idea and is very often can have a synonym, which is a single word, or is translated into Turkish by a single word. So, for example, let's look at of course. Okay, a lot of these words are prepositional phrases beginning with of or to or in or on. Of course, there's a single word in English, evidently or obviously, which would correspond, and I'm sure there's a single word in Turkish which corresponds. Of course is one of the very basic early words, phrases which they learn. Another prepositional phrase is by the way. And then you have what's called binomials, something and something, or something and something, something or something. By and large, which means generally, you could not possibly guess by knowing what by means, what and means, and what large means. So you need to teach these words, teach these expressions as global expressions and teach what they mean. Here's another binomial, fair and square. How on earth would you know what that meant? It's purely arbitrary and you need to teach it as a global expression. Then there are the phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are multi-word items as well. So look after, for example, or get on with. And then there are rhyming ones like willy-nilly, whether you like it or not. Okay, these willy-nilly is a fairly advanced item, but a word like look after, an item like good, look after, or of course, need to be taught really at the very early stages. They're really important. At the end of Ben's presentation, someone asked about collocation, and Ben thought maybe what they meant was collaboration, but collocation is what I'm talking about here. Collocation is teach a new word and what it goes with, words which tend to go together. So for example, angry goes with, which it probably doesn't in Turkish. What do your students say after angry if they're translating from Turkish? They probably make a mistake here. Can you type in the angry to? Yes, 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 exactly. In Hebrew, they say angry on, because that's the equivalent in Hebrew. Afraid of, what do they say afraid after afraid in Turkish? Afraid from, yes, yes. A lot of languages have from after afraid. English says of for some reason. So they need to learn this, because otherwise they're going to make a mistake. It's very often the prepositions are a really important thing to teach with adjectives or verbs. What preposition tends to come after, and what adjectives go with what nouns. For example, tall and high. In Turkish, do you use the same word for tall and high? A tall person, high mountain? Or do you have two different words? Yes, no, yes, the same, yes. Don't differentiate. Most languages don't. English is odd here. Other languages, tall and high is the same thing, and therefore they need to know. Tall collocates with things like a person, a tall boy, a tall man, but high with things like a mountain, and usually abstract things as well, like a high price or high expectations. Same thing with fast and quick. Okay, probably the same thing again. The same thing in Turkish as it is in Hebrew. But in English, there's a difference between what you can say is fast and what you can say is quick. So you'd say fast food. You wouldn't say quick food. A quick review, a quick question rather than a fast question, and so on. And adverbs that go with particular verbs, like soundly. You sleep soundly, but I can't think of anything else you do soundly. And dead right, but you can't say dead correct for some reason. So all of these things are confused. Yes, someone says tall and long are confused. Yes, they are in other languages as well. So you need to say what context they're appropriate for and what they'll go with. It's all collocation. Tip 5, reading test. Here's one of the ones which I think might surprise you. You don't always have to pre-teach vocabulary. Usually teachers are told pre-teach the vocabulary, it'll help the students. It doesn't help that much. It's surprising, actually. I'm not saying don't, I'm saying don't always have to pre-teach vocabulary. If you teach the words immediately before reading a text, they probably won't remember it. And when they come up against them in a text, they won't immediately remember what you told them the word meant. I said before, in order to retain a word, you need to review it. One-time teaching won't work. So, and there is some evidence that pre-teaching vocabulary doesn't help comprehension very much. So if you pre-teach, then not all the new items in the text, a few key items, and make sure you do it at least one day before so that you have time to review. Yes, Bucket is saying quite rightly, maybe keywords, they can get the meaning of the words in the context, absolutely. If you're going to pre-teach, leave time to review them before reading, but it is fine, as Bucket says, it's fine to teach the new words as they come up in the text, which gives the words within a meaningful context. They immediately contribute to the text comprehension. And then, of course, really, really important, you've finished reading your text, let's go back and review the important words. Tip number 6. Here's another surprising one. Don't usually ask students to guess words from context, because in most cases, and this is based on research, they get it wrong. And I'll give you a demonstration in a moment. They get it wrong, they get frustrated, they have a feeling of failure, and they're not learning the new words. So why do it? It wastes time as well. Let's try it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking, give myself a break for a moment, and take a pencil and paper and see, you don't have to put this into the chat box. Take a pencil and paper and just write for yourself or think for yourself. What are the missing words here? And the heading will give you a clue, so you know what it's about. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read through this and just note down what you guess the missing words are. Okay, as I say, you don't need to put them in the chat box, just note on a piece of paper or just think in your heads what these missing words are. Okay, I should be playing music here, but I'm not very good at that, so I'll just have to wait for a minute or two to give you time to guess. Okay. If anyone feels they've guessed all they can you write in the chat box finished, and then I'll know that I can carry on. It's quite a difficult text. I don't expect everyone to finish it, but if 1 or 2 people finish it, then we'll move on and I'll show you the answers. The research, if you write to me, email me, I'll send you the research on this. As I say, I'm giving you my email at the end of the done. Okay, someone has done. Thank you. Okay, so even if you've only guessed, say, 2 or 3, let me show you the answers and tell me how many of the 5 missing items did you get right? One, none, 2, 1, 1, 3 is very good. 2, 2, 1, 2, yes. So on average, it's about half, or maybe actually a bit less than half. Most people, it's about, the average is about 2, I think. Thank you very much for participating in this. But it just shows what I mean. Guessing from context is not usually very useful. You did not guess the right answers, not because you don't know English, obviously, not because you're not good at it, guessing, not because you don't have the necessary strategies, but simply because words are not usually guessable from context. A really advanced, fully competent speaker of the language would also will not be able in normally to guess an unknown word from context, even if when they're written, of course, you've got the help of the shape of the word and then maybe the morphology. But normally, in more than 50% of the cases, according to the research, words are not guessable from context, and therefore it's not fair to ask our students to guess. Ask them to guess a particular item only if, and there are 1 or 2 examples in this text, only if it's fairly obvious what it is and you know they can do so successfully. In most cases, they won't be able to, so don't ask them. Otherwise, in most cases, more than 50% of the cases, just tell them what the words mean. It's a pity to waste time and get frustrated. Tip 7, which vocabulary to teach from texts and using online profilers. We don't necessarily want to teach every single new word which comes in a text, because there may be words which are not particularly useful, at least at the level of the students that we're teaching. And they may need to know the word in order to understand this particular text, but we don't necessarily want to review and make sure that they learn it permanently for their own vocabulary. We need to prioritize the most important items. But how do you know which are the most important and common? Well, your own professional judgment, but also what's called vocabulary profilers, which are based on corpus studies on the internet. And here's some possible useful websites. I'm going to look at LexTutor in a moment. Text Inspector, another one, which is based on the Cambridge corpus and relates to the CFR levels, and Word and Phrase, which is based on an American corpus. But let's look at LexTutor. LexTutor is the top one. And if you click on the link I gave you, then you come to this. You see the white box in the middle of the page. That's where you put in your text. So if I put in the text about recycling clothes like this, I copy paste into that, and then I click on count, and I get something like this. Now, as you'll see from the key at the top left, K1 means the topmost important and frequent 1,000 words. K2 means the next most important. K3 means the third 1,000. The first 2,000 is more or less elementary school or A1, A2, K3 you're already getting into B1, and K4 is definitely B2. So you're moving up. So if you look at this, this key with the words highlighted in different colors, you'll see that the blue ones are the easy ones you want to make sure they all know. The green ones, you might want to teach them depending on the level. And the yellow and the orange ones, you will teach only to the most advanced learners, or you will just say, well, this is what it means in the text, but don't worry about it in the moment. You don't need to write it down and learn it. What you do need to write down and learn is the important ones, which are in blue and green, the top 2,000 most important words. These tools don't, of course, give you chunks. They don't give you the multi-word items, and those you have to look for on your own. But they do give you a helpful key as to which words are the most important and most useful to learn. It's okay to practice words out of context. Perhaps you're surprised by this one as well. You don't always have to contextualize in full sentences. If you always contextualize in full sentences, it takes more time, and we don't always have a lot of time. So single word review is also useful, or brief phrases. For example, I mentioned before, how many words can you remember that we learned last lesson? Or how many words can you translate of the ones on the board? How many can you translate into Turkish? Or a quick dictation, or identifying the odd one out, or yes, no. Yes, no is when you give them a page with lots of words or phrases that you've taught and ask them to tick all the ones they know, and put a question mark by the ones they don't, and then remind them of the ones they don't. It's just a very nice way of giving them credit also for the ones they know, as well as identifying the ones they don't. Words in phrases rather than sentences. So I want to practice the word question. So instead of saying, give me a sentence with the word question, I just say, what adjectives could you apply to the word question? They give something like a hard question, easy question, a first question, last question. And by giving you the phrases, that gives them sort of mini context, but they don't have to think up an entire sentence. Or how many phrases can you think of using the word under? So under the table, under my hand, under whatever. Tip number 9, am I halfway through? About. Tip number 9, make the exercises interesting. Taking a textbook exercise, let's look and see how we can make it more interesting. For example, okay, this is a gap fill. As it is, it's pretty boring, right? You just fill in, Mary likes eating ice cream. The boy is riding a bicycle, and so on. Now, you have to be ready to change things in the textbook. So what I'm suggesting here is do it first the normal way, and then delete part of the root sentence. So Mary, ice cream. The boy, a bicycle. And ask them to make up sentences that have something else. So Mary doesn't like ice cream. Mary has ice cream. Mary is buying ice cream. Or the family, apartment. So the family is buying an apartment. The family doesn't have an apartment. And you are again practicing the target items, but in all sorts of different ways. And you're getting a lot more practice. My daughter paints the house with her ice cream. Lovely. Paints the apartment with her ice cream. Or personalize. In other words, delete the subject and substitute I. And ask them to make sense with I and the target lexical item. So I love ice cream, or I can't ride a bicycle, or I climb the tree. Okay. Shami, you're asking about synonyms. I don't know exactly what you mean. Write in a question at the end of the session and I'll see if I can answer it. Or simply delete the word bank and invite students to write all sorts of other different lexical items there other than the target one. So Mary likes eating, and you can put in almost any food there, couldn't you? The boy is riding a bicycle, riding a motorbike, riding a horse, riding a donkey, riding a camel. And you get lots of answers, and it makes it a lot more interesting and also gives a lot more practice. But the main thing I'm interested in here is interest. And you have to be ready to delete things in the textbook to open out the questions so they can make all sorts of different answers. Basically, you're making the questions open-ended, lots of right answers instead of one right answer, which means they're more creative, it's more humorous, and it's unpredictable. You're using higher order thinking. They're having to think a little bit rather than just slotting in the right answer. Making their brains work a little bit. And it's personalized, particularly the last one, sorry, not the last one, the second last one I asked you to make questions with I. It means that they are relating the target items to themselves, which immediately becomes more interesting. Tip 10, avoid word games like hangman and word search. They're mainly a waste of time for vocabulary learning. Because if you analyze what you're doing when you're playing hangman or doing a word search, you are actually spending more time searching or making wrong guesses than you are doing finding. And therefore it's not a good use of time, which is why I'm saying it's a waste of time. They're good if you want a game just to fill the time because the students are rather unruly and you're having problems controlling, you want to do something interesting, then they're good for time fillers, but for learning vocabulary, they are not very useful. Try to avoid them unless, as I say, you're doing them for the sake of motivation or just to keep things going until the end of the lesson. And the same thing goes for scrambled words, as Nazan is asking. Scrambled words, if you give a list of scrambled words, you'll find they're spending more time trying to puzzle out than they are finding the right answer. And time spent fruitlessly trying to find out and not succeeding is not learning time. It's a waste of time. If they can do it very, very quickly and easily, that's fine. But if it takes more time, then it's a waste of time, and I would avoid it. Tip number 10, I know this is problematic in Turkey because Turkish teachers on the whole don't like using L1, but use it as well when introducing the meaning of a new vocabulary item. And I'm going to skip through the various possibilities of how to present the meaning of a new word. Just you can read for yourself what it's got on the screen here and show where translation fits in here. Picture has great impact. That's why it's a nice thing to use, but it may be ambiguous and not all items can be depicted. So for example, if I want to say happy and I show something like this, the students might think it means smile, or it might think it means face or smiley or all sorts of things. And if you want to make quite sure they understand what it means, you slip in a quick translation to Turkish and show the picture, and then you know that the picture has made the impact and introduced the word you want. Reali and mime, the same sort of thing, impact, but again, they may be ambiguous, and of course you can't represent all items by reali or mime. Synonyms, very quick, but only at higher levels, because it assumes that the students have enough vocabulary that you can find a synonym they already know for the new word, and it may not be accurate because there are very few exact synonyms within a language. Explanation, again, higher levels, which and you have added exposure to English, but it takes time. Have a look at this explanation of the word disappointed. The explanation takes a long time. And if I give this explanation in my class, what happens is that one of the students calls out the L1 translation anyway. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief, and then they go back and they can understand the explanation. But the explanation itself is difficult and time-consuming. Nazan asks, I wonder if after teaching the target vocabulary and making our students learn, can't we still use games? You can, but it's a waste of time. It doesn't add anything. I would rather do other things which are a good use of time. The definition is more challenging than the word itself. Exactly, Sybil, that's exactly the point. And so we might as well just give a quick translation and then use the time we've saved to do all sorts of interesting things with the word disappointed in English context. Examples, as in the examples here, but not everything is easily explained by examples. Okay, so you can't explain television, for example, by examples, or the word very by examples. You'd need categories like the ones I've given here. Use in context, but I've already said and shown you that context does not give away the meaning. Very often you cannot guess the meaning from context. So these sentences, which I'm showing on the screen now with the word discuss, may or may not help students understand discuss, but you can't rely on it. If, however, you give a translation and then you give them the word in context, then the contextualization will help and it's useful, but only after they know what discuss means, not before they know. How about using visuals? Yes, that's what I was talking about. Pictures is visuals. That's what I meant by pictures. Translation. The point about translation is usually pretty accurate, very quick, and it's natural. It's what we naturally do. The students tend to look for how do you say this in Turkish? But of course, not much impact. Danger of assuming that it's a one-to-one. Bottom line, my bottom line anyway, which I recommend to you, is use pictures, explanation, mime, examples, context, etc., with a quick translation as backup, either before or after you give the other things. So what I'm saying is not either or, but both and. Use all these English language or visual-based techniques with a quick translation as a backup, and don't feel guilty about it. There's no reason to feel guilty about it. If it helps, and if you're spending most of your time on English and just using the Turkish as insurance, then that's fine. Yes, hangman is a problem, isn't it? Okay, I won't get into that further. Leave you to discuss that. As I said before, these tips are to add to what you said, not to substitute. Tip 12, don't teach lexical sets together for the same time. Colors, parts of the body, prepositions, action verbs. There's some evidence they aren't learned very well because they interfere with one another. And the research is that a lot of research on this that taught students a whole set of words which were combined, a lot of that come from the same lexical set. Like they said, these words mean red, yellow, green, blue, and then they gave them the same words and said these words mean cloud, sky, frog, car. Okay, nothing to do with one another. And then they checked to see which set the students learned better. They were the same actual pseudo words, not real words, the same words, but in one case they were told they were red, yellow, green, and so on, and the other they were told they were disconnected in meaning. And the result was consistently that the students learned the disconnected ones better. They remembered them better when they were tested. And the bottom line is it's better to teach items that will naturally co-occur in a given context, not a list of items that are the same sort of thing. So not to teach blue, if you're teaching blue, not to teach it with red, yellow, green, but rather to teach it with sky, because it goes with sky in a natural context, or with dress, or something like that. Similarly, not to teach mother, daughter, mother, father, daughter, son, uncle, aunt, cousin, and so on when you're teaching about the family, but rather words that might go together if you're talking about the family, like ones I've got listed here. Okay. Don't spend ages checking homework exercise in class. I've been in observed lessons when the teacher spent half the lesson checking the homework exercises, and they didn't have time to get onto her main lesson plan. So if they've done a vocabulary exercise at home, don't usually go through the whole entire exercise again in class, but it's better either just to provide the answers and they self-check, or tell them to check each other. You can put them, if you're doing it in Zoom, put them into breakout rooms, as Ben suggested earlier, and check each other in pairs, and only ask you later if there's anything they're not sure about. The best, of course, if you have time, and we're all short of time, but if you have time, the best is to take in their homework and check it at home. That's best for them, gives the most useful feedback, and it doesn't waste lesson time. But as I say, if you have time. Tip 14, get students to present new vocabulary. So your homework today is to find a new word from outside, either from, I don't know, from signs up in the city, or from something you saw on the internet, or something you've asked your parents, and bring it to class and teach the rest of the students. It saves you a little trouble, and it's extra vocabulary enrichment, word of the day, phrase of the day. Just a caveat here, just a tip, make sure you have a reserve, because sometimes the students forget to do it. So you need always a reserve. Idiom of the week, yes, proverb of the week, and so on. Tip 15, get students to design tests, vocabulary tests. If you want to test all the vocabulary you've learned over the last month or term or 6 weeks, ask students either in class or for homework to design test questions. They could do it in pairs, they could do it individually. Then you take them in, correct them, and you design the test based on their items. And there's lots of advantages to this. First of all, preparing the test themselves is in itself a review of the vocabulary. So they're reviewing as they're preparing, and it lowers test anxiety. The students feel ownership of the test, and they don't worry so much that the teacher's going to surprise them with her own, your own test items. Tip 16, and I think Ben mentioned this as well, use interactive tools. If you're using Zoom, in general, face-to-face is better, but if you're using Zoom, make it as interactive as you can, getting students to use microphones, cameras. If you have a small enough class, then keep the microphones on the whole time. Using the chat box, as I'm trying to do now, using breakout rooms, using polls. All these interactive tools are really important. Use them as much as you can for vocabulary teaching online. Tip 17, encourage students to look for new vocabulary outside the classroom. I mentioned this earlier when I suggested word of the day, phrase of the day. But even if you're not doing word of the day, encourage students to look for new vocabulary outside the classroom, and you can incorporate this into homework. So homework assignments to read, obviously, extensive reading. If your school has easy books they can read. To search for new vocabulary in the city or village landscape, signs over shops, or labels on goods, or in the supermarket. searching for new vocabulary and noting it. Watching YouTube clips. I was just introduced recently to the YouTubes which are called unboxing, which some students are really, really keen on and love. And okay, it's more English. Anything which grabs them, even if it doesn't grab you, anything which really interests them. Finding out things online, all the sorts of things, surfing the net, using English to surf the net, but looking out for new vocabulary as they go. Tip 18, prioritize international vocabulary. There is sometimes some controversy over British English, American English. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, will this word expression be understood by other people using English as an international language? And here, let me show you these. Which of these would you think is most important, more important of the two pairs? Which is more important to teach your students for international English, if you want them to be understood internationally? Fortnight or 2 weeks? Billfold or fortnight is only used in British English and other, New Zealand, Australia, people who use British English. It's not used at all in the States. I remember when I first went to the States, I used fortnight quite inadvertently in a conversation with someone, and they did not know what I meant. There's a huge number of English speakers in the world, perfectly competent English speakers, who do not know what a fortnight is. Stick to 2 weeks, which is clear. Billfold and wallet. Billfold is only on the only in the States. I didn't know what a billfold was until I went there, and it was explained to me. Wallet is much more international. Fall and autumn. Autumn is more international. Program and program. Which do you write? Program with one M or 2 M's? Interesting. Yeah. Most people with 1 M. Yes, I do too. Although I was born and brought up in an English which uses the double M-E, I now, since I've been living outside the UK for 50 years, I regularly spell it with 1 M, and this is the international spelling. So I would teach my students to spell it with 1 M. So it's not always the right-hand one, right? In this case, it's the left-hand one of the pair. She just finished, she has just finished. These are actually both acceptable. The problem is that she has just finished is treated as correct, quote unquote. And therefore, if they're doing a grammar exam, they probably have to use she has just in order to get the marks. And therefore, that's what you'll need to teach them. But you need to know that she just finished, the simpler form, just of the past simple, is perfectly acceptable in spoken English all over the world. Do you have you got? Which do you teach? Do you have or have you got? Both of them are okay, of course, but have you got, again, is marked for British English. British English elementary books use have you got, although it was pointed out to me recently that there is a shift towards, even in the British elementary textbooks, to do you have, simply because it is internationally more acceptable. It's also simpler, much simpler, and simpler to use in the past and future tenses as well. So on the whole, if your textbook does not confine you to have you got, I would recommend for international English to teach do you have. Finally, the tag questions. It's here, isn't it? It's here, no, it's here, right? All over the world now, people are tending to abandon tag questions in informal conversation and just say no or right or things like that. And we don't really need to worry about this very complex teaching of different kinds of tag questions. Shouldn't we? Aren't they? Didn't he? And so on, according to the context, when you can just put a simple no or right at the end of your sentence and get the same message. Here too, there are some really interesting website I want to introduce you to. I'm going a couple of minutes over time, but I did actually start late, so that's okay. It's a website based on the corpus of global web-based English. And what this does is it shows you in which countries a particular word or multi-word item is used. So if we put in, for example, if we compare billfold and wallet, so the top table shows you the findings for billfold. And if you look at the headings there in light blue, starts with all, and then US, which is clear, CA, which is Canada, GB, which is Great Britain, IE, which is Ireland, and so on. And what we see with billfold is that it's used quite a lot in the United States and in HK's Hong Kong, and very little anywhere else. Whereas wallet, there's much more blue. There's many more columns there, so it's much more universally used. So this shows that immediately at the click of a mouse, which one is preferable, which one is used more widely worldwide. Similarly, do you have and have you got? Okay, you can see that do you have much more blue there, much more higher columns. Have you got much more limited and much more variable according to the country. So used a lot in Great Britain, in Australia, in Ireland, in New Zealand, places where British English is spoken, not very much elsewhere. And so preferable to use do you have. As a message, could you send me your presentation after the webinar? I can't see copy your email address now. I said I would give you my email address at the end of the presentation. Please will you write to me and I will send it. Tip 19, don't overuse the dictionary. Students need to know how to use a dictionary, obviously, and it's good to teach dictionary skills, but I've seen teachers waste a lot of time telling students to look up things in class. In class, you are the best dictionary because you know which meaning they want to look for. You're quick, you're accurate, you're user-friendly. Finally, tip 20, most important, never say never. Tips are ideas that can often help, but there may be situations where they don't. There may be situations where you don't want to accept them because they don't fit your style of teaching. So use selectively or adapt or indeed reject. Never say never. Thank you very much for your attention. And time for questions, Doğrusal? If so, then please go to the questions. There's questions, a question and answer thing.
I think we can answer a couple of questions.
I can't see a question answer tag. Oh, yes, I can. Sorry, Q&A, yes.
Yes.
And there's already 8 questions there. Doğrusal, what time do you want me to finish the question and answer?
We have a 40 minutes of break, so we are quite fine. Let's say you can answer a couple of questions and we can...
Okay, let's see what we've got here. There's a lot here, so I'm going to be selective, okay?
Yep.
Best way to encourage students to use the new words that they have learned. That's a much too general question. It's a very good question, but it would take me another hour to say lots of ways to use. Encourage them to use, to put them in context, I would say, and relate them to themselves as much as possible. Okay. What is the best way for students to keep a written record of the new words so they can learn efficiently? Vocabulary notebooks, and or keeping a record on their own cell phones. But keeping a record is really important, either way. Methods for teaching, I'm going to skip that one. I don't have experience of teaching that age group, I'm afraid. So I'm going to skip that one. I'm just not qualified to answer it. What do you think about using quick translation for young learners? I think it will increase motivation, not lower motivation. I think a quick translation is good, provided that you are spending most of your time speaking English and you do not allow them to say things in Turkish if they could in English. If they couldn't say it in English, then they have no alternative. But if they know the English, you do not accept a Turkish version. And the same thing with yourself. If you can say it in English and they'll understand, don't use Turkish. Use Turkish only when it facilitates or saves time. How to stop students speaking in L1. Personal example, speaking all the time in English yourself. I would say allowing them occasionally to speak L1 if they couldn't possibly say it in English. This is the criterion, really. How do you say X in English? They would have to use a Turkish word there. There are places where they do need to speak L1, but you need to distinguish between when they have to speak L1 and you don't have to. And if you don't have to, don't. Keep to English. I would say I want to keep 90% of my lesson in English, and if it's 10% in Turkish, that's okay. Universities, can we teach the words in text? Yes, university learners, I think you can teach a lot more of the words, the advanced words maybe in a text. You're a very interesting question. Is it more effective for students to talk to themselves at home since they have no one to talk to? Yes, that's a really interesting point. I would say, yes, it is effective. Get them to talk to themselves and record themselves. This is what we can do online. Record themselves and send you the recording, and then you record your answer and send it back to them. I used to do this using old-fashioned cassettes, right, with students, and it works beautifully. So, yes. Nice. Where are we? Most of the course books and teachers guide teachers to do pre-teaching of, I've lost it now. Pre-teaching, where I've lost the question. Is it a waste of time? I've already answered that. I don't think it's a complete waste of time, but you have to make sure you don't teach too many and that you allow time for review and consolidating learning before you start working on the text. And it is okay not to pre-teach. It's okay to teach the words as you encounter them in a text. Are these tips accurate for all age groups? Marwa, I'm not sure about that. Most age groups, yes, I think they are. I need to go through them again and check for each. So a cautious yes is my answer to that one. Teaching vocabulary online, it's too big a question. And just as it happens, preparing now a whole session on online teaching using Zoom for an audience in Uruguay. Next time I come to Turkey, I'll give you this session, and then we can focus only on teaching vocabulary and online teaching. I mean, so wait for that. I'll come back to Turkey sometime and do that for you. Yeah. Elul says, if they get used to learning L1 when they don't understand, they may use the motivation for focusing and understanding English. I don't think that's true. I think that if we make sure that they only use L1 if they can't use English and otherwise use English the whole time, then they will not lose their motivation for focusing and understanding English. On the contrary, which reminds me of I'm going to finish off this time because we need to, right, Doğrusal, we've run out of time.
Yes.
We run out of time?
Yes, we did actually.
So let me finish off. Please send me any questions I haven't had time to answer. Please send me to my personal email and I will write back to you. And I want to finish with a story I was told when I was in Turkey by a member of the audience on this topic of using L1. And the member of the audience said, I was visiting in a kindergarten where the teacher was speaking only English in the kindergarten, and the students were listening, and the children were listening, and the teacher did not say a word of Turkish for the whole hour is working with the children. And at the end of the session, this person who was talking to me turned to the kindergarten teacher, turned to one of the children and said, did you understand, said in Turkish, did you understand what the teacher was saying? And the child said, no, of course not, it was English. In other words, English is something we don't understand, which is not the message we want to convey. We want to convey English is something we do understand, and therefore, if I'm going to use English in the classroom, I need to make sure it is English which is comprehensible, and if I need to slip in a Turkish word here and then to help, I will do so. Anyway, thank you very much for listening anyway, and for having me, and please feel free to send me emails. I'll send you the presentation and ask any questions which I didn't have time to answer here. Okay. So there we are. Bye for now.
Many thanks to you, Penny, for being with us today and sharing your over 30 years of expertise on teaching vocabulary. I hope you all enjoyed our third session. Now we have another 40 minutes of break. Make sure to be with us at 3:30 p.m. as we have an inspirational session with David Valente. Okay. Enjoy your coffee break. Thank you. Welcome back to our last session. We are almost coming to an end today. Our last session will be an inspirational session by David Valente. In this session, David will be delivering back to school physically distance, boosting children's engagement with English. David Valente is the coordinator of the IATFL Young Learners and Teenagers Special Interest Group. Based in Norway, he works as a PhD research fellow in English language and literature subject pedagogy at Nord University. David has over 20 years experience in ELT as a teacher educator, academic manager, author, and editor, and his special interests include children's literature in ELT, primary and secondary teacher education, and inclusive classroom practices. Enjoy your last session with David Valente. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Doğrusal, and thank you to all of you for staying until the last session today and for coming back. Given how hot I understand it is in Turkey, it's certainly not hot in Norway at the moment, especially not here in the Arctic Circle. Okay, so this session is an Inspire session, and that means it's to give you inspiration for practical tips for when you go back to the classroom. So back to the physical classroom. I want these tips to be very simple so that you can actually implement them when the schools, particularly the primary schools, reopen in Turkey and you're teaching again in your classrooms. So hopefully there'll be ideas you can take away today and adapt according to your class, the children you teach, and your particular teaching context. I'm especially happy to be giving this session for the Cambridge University Press Day in Turkey, because Turkey is one of the places over 20 years ago where I started teaching children English. So this is me, if you can believe that. With Turkish children in Bandırma 23 years ago in 1997, and this is an English language summer school for children. And then I returned to Turkey 20 years later. 3 years ago, I worked on a Cambridge CELTA and Cambridge Delta course in Izmir. And so 3 years on, here we are back virtually working with Turkish teachers. So I'm very happy to be here. Now, I also wanted to start with these photographs of these primary children around 10 years old, because what do we notice about them? Notice how close together they all are, how grouped together they are. And given our current situation, our unfortunate and very challenging situation, we need to try to capture and to nurture the joy, as you can see on those children's faces, the magical side of learning English while maintaining a safe distance. And that isn't easy. And so I've been working very recently with my team on the IATEFL Young Learners and Teenagers Special Interest Group to come up with some very practical and very straightforward tips that teachers around the world, including in Turkey, can work with and try and adapt for their own context so they can maintain the magical and maintain that joy of learning English for primary children while keeping a safe distance. The first 3 tips I'm going to share are all to do with before we actually start doing certain activities back at school. We need to do certain things so these activities can work in a safe, physically distanced way. Okay, so first tip is obviously before children can learn and interact in a safe way, they need to understand in an age-accessible and child-friendly way the concept of physical distance. The younger the children are that you're working with, that you're teaching, the more this has to be very visual and very concrete. So using real objects. We've suggested there having them visualize the number of animals it would take to make a 2-meter distance, the number of toys, the number of plants. This could relate to the topic that you're teaching at the moment to help children really visualize distance and not make it scary or daunting or something they should really worry about. Okay, so here's some ideas for you. These are more to give you as teachers ideas about this 2-meter distance, because I'm not great actually with measurements. So sometimes for me, it isn't always easy to visualize the distance myself. So here's some I've collected for you as teachers, depending on your interests. So for example, for the animal lovers there, we have a giant panda. So the one at the top, imagining that between you and a colleague in the staff room, in the teacher's room, there's a giant panda. Also on the topic of animals or mini beasts or spiders and so on, the other one at the top is the huntsman spider. So this is a meme for Australia. Down at the bottom then we have distance for plant people. So the various different plants that people who love plants would understand. So you can see them there. And here's a one for Canada with the Canadian moose. So you're getting the idea of making it visual, making it playful in a way, because although we're in a very challenging situation, we have to remember that we are working with young children who we need to try to take the scary element out of it. So I got to brainstorming, what could we use for Turkey? So here we go. These are some ideas. So these are 2 children, and how many evil eyes would it take for 2 meters? Now I've just put 5 up there, but it's probably more like 10, isn't it, to get that 2-meter physical distance? Another idea, how many pieces of baklava would you need to get that 2-meter physical distance? I think maybe 50. All right. Here, so we're very much in this food theme now. Moving away from that, how many Turkish carpets would it take to get the physical distance? That's another very nice one. Also, how many Turkish coffees would it take for the physical distance? Perhaps my favorite, how many posters of Kenan would it take for the physical distance? So you can play with this, you can really try and appeal to the children's interests. But what we're trying to do is make the concept of distance very visual, very immediate, and very child-friendly. Okay, so you can take that away with you as a concept, especially for the first day back at school, and think about how to make the idea of distance very, very concrete and very visible in the children's mind's eyes. All right, moving on then to another tip that's all to do with preparation. Tip number 2. This is around dealing with papers, so dealing with handouts, dealing with materials. Very much depends on the guidelines that Turkey, the ministry, advise, and also your school. But we often say with children, and you'll have noticed this from your own classroom experience, it's really important that when we're setting up an activity, when we're setting up the task, we give our instructions first. We do a model, we do a demonstration, we give an example before handing out the materials. Well, if there is some challenges around passing materials between the children in the class, let's prepare before they come into the classroom. So one idea here is having the papers on the desk already before they come in, but face down. So you can still follow that teaching technique, that principle of task before text, and then they can turn over when it's time to look at the worksheet, read the worksheet, etc. So really thinking before you start your lesson, what preparation do you need to put in place for safe handling of materials? So that's tip number 2. Moving on then to tip number 3. Again, we don't want to take out the enjoyment or the pleasure of learning English in the primary years. And often, as those of you who've attended my sessions before, I'm a huge believer in music, in song, and in movement to motivate, to engage, and to adopt a whole body approach to the learning of English. So my recommendation is that we continue to do this, but in a safe way. And again, children being very aware of space and the limits, if you like, of their bubble is super important. We've seen some photographs on social media, in the press, around how different countries in the world have done that. Here's some photographs from playgrounds and one from a classroom. So we've physically marked on the floor, in the schoolyard, on the ground, or in the classroom on the floor, the distances. So you see there with tape, and another one is using chalk and hoops. I've tried to recreate that in my living room. I'm not sure how successfully, using Fun Skills books. So I don't know if you can see that on the floor. Maybe you can, but I've tried to recreate. I'm not suggesting you use course books, by the way, in the classroom floor, but just to make that concept very clear and very visual. I hope you can see, and I wonder whether I have captured 2 meters. Not as easy as you might think, but it's important that because of the conceptual age and the stage of young children, as the younger, the more this has to be very, very concrete. It's very important that we do take these practical measures so children can see the limits of that bubble, and then you can still do your movement and your action songs and your rhymes and your chants and your physical games, but within the safe confines of that bubble. So those first 3 tips are very much about preparations that teachers are encouraged to take before we actually start the lesson. Okay, the next one then is about, you will be familiar with regrouping and pairing and repairing. Now, principle behind this, of course, is to give children plenty of interaction with different partners in the classroom. But the guidelines are suggesting that too much moving around and changing chairs and so on isn't the safest idea. But we still want to do our pair work. we still want to do our group work. And I think Ben, in his session earlier today, was talking very much about the crucial importance of maintaining collaboration in our classrooms. So here's an idea. So instead of the children changing chairs, moving around the classroom in that way, the suggestion is that with their chair, they can be facing forwards. They could also turn around so their chair is facing backwards. They could go to the left. They could go to the right. So what we're doing here is we're rotating the chair so we can still talk to different neighbors and different partners and continue doing those communicative pair work and group work activities that I'm sure many of you are familiar with in your English lessons. So really thinking about rotating chairs so they are having the interaction, but not too much moving around different tables and partners and desks in the classroom. So that's keeping the speaking practice and the communicative element of English alive. Okay, the other one is that, you know, we are predominantly language teachers. Our role is to teach children English, but we're always, when we're working with primary, balancing the fact that we are teaching the children language, but we're also, and I would argue first and foremost, teachers of children, teachers of young people, and we can't divorce our English lessons from the experience they've just had and that we've all just had. So the idea of building in, incorporating activities into our English lessons that link to social and emotional learning, sometimes abbreviated to SEL. So themes like perseverance, resilience, grit, emotional literacy, and so on. Now, a very, very recent article, an excellent article that's freely downloadable, and I'll give you the reference at the end, written by Mari Delaney. And Mari is an educational psychotherapist, and she has suggested some very practical and very easy to implement activities to work on children's SEL, social and emotional learning, within an English language teaching context. And I've chosen some of my favorite ones that you could experiment with and you could adapt and see how they go with the children that you teach. Okay, so this one is about checking in with children and checking out at the ends of lessons, at the ends of major activities. How are they feeling emotionally? How are they doing? Because we can't take away the child from the language learning. The child needs to be central to our language learning. So the first one is using very simple, and we'll work with children of lower level English as well, and younger children. So 1 word or 2 word feelings to ask them how they're feeling, so they can show in just 1 or 2 words. If they have very little English, this could become visual. So you could have a feelings board or even a slide with pictures of feelings, and the children can point to the board and say, without touching, but point in the air, how they are feeling. So checking in with 1 or 2 words or pictures. Another one is, again, very simple, and this is to do with numbers. So if we're feeling great, it's a 10. If we're feeling average, 5, 6, or if we're really feeling quite sad, 1 or 2. So giving that opportunity for children to check in and check out at the end of the lesson as well. Really child-friendly one that really shows you quite powerfully how they're feeling is the internal weather report. So children might say something like, we can feel like a sunny day. So you can say, well, how are you feeling today? Oh, we feel like a sunny day. That means we're feeling happy, we're feeling excited. We're feeling like it's raining, so maybe we're feeling sad. We're feeling like it's stormy, we're feeling angry. And all those emotions children will obviously be feeling with this circumstance. Another nice one, which you could link to the topics in your course book and your materials, are film genres and music genres. So for example, I'm feeling like a comedy, so I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling like a horror, I'm feeling aggressive. And you can think of music styles and music genres and Turkish singers who they would know and be familiar with, linking to this music genre. So these are very child-friendly ways, and they give some useful English practice as well, some useful chunks of language, useful vocabulary, can link to your course book topic, but also bringing in the social and emotional learning aspect. More ideas from Mari Delaney then. She talks about the need for children to empathize in their English lessons, to connect with the other children who have had that shared experience and create that sense of belonging. One of my favorite ones is community kindness posters. So this is where children can reflect on the lockdown now that they are back in school and make a poster of what they did in their community to help. So during lockdown, we did this to help our neighbors, to help older people in the community, to help people who couldn't go to the shops, etc. So they then can show how they have those commonalities in the group about how they shared in their community. And the poster is a child-friendly way of displaying the kindness. This is another nice one because children will be feeling insecure when they come back to school and so on. And who can help me really lets them personalize, so they can say something they need help with, and then other children in the class can volunteer to help them with that. So again, building that sense of classroom community. My secret friend is a great one. This is, you might have used this for vocabulary activities actually, where the children write their names on a post-it, for example, and then the post-its all go into the bag, and the children take out a post-it from the bag, if that's allowed in your school with, again, the paper handling, and they keep that post-it secret. And then throughout the school week, they really try and help that friend without telling them that that's the name on the post-it. So that's why it's a secret. Another one, our lives. So this is actually a circle time activity originally. You will have to really check on the distance, so hands out for the distance. But they could, if you could do this outside, maybe in the schoolyard if it's not too hot, where they are in the circle, and then they all stand up, and the teacher says a statement and then can hand over to the children. And if the statement is true, they sit down, stand up again, and more statements. And if it's true, they sit down. So again, we're seeing that other children in our class have the same experience as us, and they share those commonalities for connection, for belonging. This one is very, very important. Mari talks a lot in her article about trauma and the effects of trauma and the need for us to build in relaxation into our English lessons and give the children brain breaks, and perhaps now more than ever. So 5-finger breathing is a really nice one, and it's very, very simple. So the children hold up their hand, hold up one hand, and then with the forefinger of another hand, the children draw with their finger around their other hand. As they go up one finger, they breathe in. And as they go down, they breathe out. And if you think about that, that's a really relaxing, calming technique. Many of you will be familiar with the principle of stir and settle in the primary English classroom. This is an excellent settling technique, but also a collective community building technique as well. So why don't we just try that? So be brave, be bold, and put up your hands, everybody, and forefinger, and let's just try. So going up, breathe in and down, going up and down, and up and down, and up and down, and up and down. Hope you feel relaxed. All right, another one, very physical, not calm like 5-finger breathing, is shake it out. So this is where the children are wanting to release that stress and that energy. So they start shaking their hands, their arms slowly, and then more and more and more until the whole body's shaking. So remember, I said earlier, the importance of a whole body approach in our English language lessons with children, and shake it out is yet another example of that. The importance as well of giving the children a safe distance within which to explore feelings. And this is where course books with stories in them and course books with characters in them, so familiar characters that the children know and they've been studying in their English lessons, are a very safe way for the children to explore feelings that's not overly personalized. So questions about the course book characters, for example, how do you think they felt? Who helped them? So if you are not 100% comfortable about asking the children to talk about their feelings of lockdown and so on, it can be done at one remove by putting the discussion of feelings around the course book characters. So it's a safe way to do this, and perhaps a useful way for younger children especially, so that it's not daunting, it's not scary, and it's safe. Another one, based on the principle of giving this emotional distance safely at one remove, is an alien puppet interview. So bringing in a puppet to the classroom, and the children communicate in English to the puppet. So those of you who teach younger primary will be familiar with puppets. Many course books now for younger children have puppets and puppet characters. It gives another voice, another persona in the classroom, and another reason for the children to communicate. So, for example, the puppet can ask the children, what makes people feel sad? Why are people sad? And the children can then talk about the experience to the puppet and also explain the rules for physical distancing and for staying safe to the puppet. So again, it depersonalizes while at the same time relating to their experiences. So these ideas, these simple activities will very much depend on the age of the children you're working with, their English levels, but also their characters, their personalities, and also what you feel comfortable with doing as a teacher. And so I wanted to share with you a range of ideas from Mari Delaney, and then you can experiment and you can adapt. So hopefully those will be useful for bringing in that social emotional learning element. I'll give you the reference where you can download the open access publication at the end of the session. Okay, so moving on then to our next tip. And I'm not sure how many of you have already experimented with or regularly use shouting dictations, but we want to keep that communicative focus on the skills, on our listening skills, on our speaking skills, on our reading skills, and on our writing skills. I'm sure many of you use many variations of dictations. One of my favorites is the shouting dictation, and obviously it's loud. And some teachers say to me, oh, too loud, you know, annoys the classroom next door and so on. So it might not be something you do every lesson, every day, but it can be a great energizer and great for integrated skills practice. And also, you need to think about, if you're going to do a shouting dictation, that safe distance. But it gives the children a reason to distance, because they need to be apart so they can shout and really project their voices. Let's try that now. Let's see if I can recreate that in my kitchen for you. All right, one of my favorite topics then is my dream school. Now, school often comes up in course books for children learning English. We can make that more engaging, more child-friendly, if we give it the context of a dream school, where the imagination and fantasy and play and playfulness can come into play. So these are some reading texts about children around the world describing their dream schools. So we put the children into pairs, but physically distanced pairs. So I have one chair here. I hope you can see that. Yeah, one chair there, and then one chair I'm gonna put over here. All right, so quick demonstration of a couple of lines for you. First one then. So, in my dream school, the older children teach us English. And then the partner goes, my dream school is in a big circus and our teachers are clowns. And so they're listening and they are writing. And that is a great way to have that physical distance, but keep the focus on communicating around the skills. So that's one of my favorites. Okay. And here you see the complete text. So dream schools, obviously very personalized. And then after you've had that communicative, noisy, very loud stage of your lesson, the children can then settle and write their own dream school. Great practice for vocabulary, and vocabulary linking to school, to clothes, because they choose what the school uniform is. They choose who their teachers are, which could be all kinds of creative ideas. They choose what food they eat in their dream school, and also the buildings that the dream school is in. So a great way to have that stirring but safe, rousing stage of your lesson, and then they can do the writing individually for a settled and a calm stage of the lesson. Okay, this is another one which is usually requires movement. So when they're getting into older primary and you're wanting to get into expressing opinions, agreeing and disagreeing in English, sometimes teachers will lead into this around a topic with the four corners. So, you know, this corner we strongly agree, strongly disagree, that corner, and so on. So the children move around the room. Well, in a physically distanced context, that's not very safe, is it? So let's think of other ways we can still make it active and using the whole body that doesn't involve this manic racing around the classroom into the four corners. The four corners. Okay, let me demonstrate this one then. So for strongly agree, so for example, we're working on the topic of dream schools. Let's continue with that topic. So one child, for example, says, I want a dream school. I'd like a dream school in the jungle. And if they fully agree, the children stand on their tiptoes and raise their hands in the air. And the children who disagree are in their bubble and they crouch down. Children who are not sure are halfway up. Okay, I'm sure you can think of many variations on that, but it makes it fun, it makes it physical, it makes it active. So it's a variation on the four corners, especially good when there is something to agree or disagree about. So it could work for group work where they have to have a group dream school, for example, and they have to then come to consensus around the uniform for their school, the building, the food, and who the teachers are in their dream school. Okay. Also to do with movement is a classic find someone who. So a mingling survey activity where you want the children to walk around the classroom asking everyone. So for example, our topic's pets. Have you got a dog? Have you got a cat? Have you got a hamster? Have you got 5 rabbits? Whatever. And the children have to walk around and then write the name of the person they find. I'm sure you've done this many times before. So again, that walking around might not be the safest idea. So let's have a variation on that theme. For example, the child could, in a topic, for example, all about me, the child could write in bubbles or perhaps draw, depending on their age, their English level, vocabulary, and so on. 5 facts about themselves. So this would be the topic, introducing yourself, meeting people, all about me, etc. So a classic course book topic. And they could do that on a card, on a large card that they can display and show. So all the children around the classroom can clearly see. So they can hold up their card and they can clearly see the 5 things about their classmates. And then they could turn the game I Spy to identify common things in the classroom and guess who that person is. So for example, I've given you an example. This is all about Sinem. Okay, so Sinem has 2 cats. She loves swimming. She's got a brother. Her favorite food's cheese and tomato pizza, and she really enjoys playing video games. Okay, so Sinem holds up her card. All the children hold up their card, and they say something like, I spy someone with TC just like me. And they're thinking, oh, TC, what does T stand for? What does C stand for? Oh, 2 cats, it's Sinem, well done. You get the idea. And again, it's fun, it's engaging. It gives them that useful grammar vocabulary practice without all of that surveying and moving around the classroom. Okay. Next one then, this is a one for you as teachers, because just like we're suggesting, it might not be the safest for the children to be mingling and moving all over the classroom. It also might not be the safest for you. It depends how you monitor or check children's work, but there are many teachers who monitor at the children's eye level, which is a very nice and child-friendly thing to do. But if you think about it, monitoring here, that there isn't that physical distance. You can't, if you're monitoring at the child's eye level and you're crouching down, you can't have that 2-meter distance. So what we're suggesting here is using a colored card system where each child, and they can make this, you don't have to give them this, they can easily color this on post-it notes, even on pieces of paper that they can reuse just for themselves. So the red card and the green card, so the children are working on a task, they're working on an activity, and they need some help. And you can see immediately how they are doing without needing to do that close monitoring of every single child in the class. So that might help you reduce the amount of movement there. Okay. Now, those are the 9 tips that we've brainstormed with the YLTC committee for teachers. And I want to now move to my number 10 tip. And my number 10 tip is that we do need to keep inspiring children. We need to inspire them to keep loving English, loving learning English, using English in our classrooms. And I think that is a key part of our role as an educator of primary children. And so, as I said earlier, one of my favorite ways to do this, one of them is actually through story. and my other one is through song. And so we're going to end now with an active song, because we want the children to stay in their bubble, but we still want to do that whole body teaching and keep them active, engaged, and motivated in English. And this links to the topic of space, which is outer space is one of my favorite topics when working with primary. And this is for children at the flyers level. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all then, I want you to be very brave and very bold, and you know, your family might wonder what you're doing. But it's great if you experience doing these action songs yourself, and then it's much clearer for you to demonstrate to the children. So the topic is let's go to space. What I'm going to do first of all is teach you the actions, and then we'll have a go. Now, you don't need to sing, you can, it's fine if you lip sync, and it's also good if teachers become great lip syncers, because then they can listen to the children singing. If you're worried, and I'm not sure about the science of this, because I think there's a lot of information we don't know yet around the world, but if you think it's not the safest to have children singing loud, they might lip sync as well. Okay, so first of all, then let's do the action. So I'd like you to stand up, everybody, and find some space. So find your bubble away from your partners. You don't want to be close. You need that distance. So 1 and 2. All right. Now, hands by our sides, first of all. Okay, so you can see there on the screen the lyrics. So the first one then, I want to be an astronaut. So this is our action for astronaut, walking on the moon. I want to be an astronaut, and I want to fly around. I want to fly around the planets. I want to take a rocket. I want to take a rocket to the stars. I want to see all of the planets in just one afternoon. And I want to take photos of Jupiter and Mars. And this is the chorus then, the repeated refrain, which is such a positive message for today. And that's why I chose this song to finish. I think I will be fine. I think I will be fine. But how will I feel? Alone in a spaceship, looking down at the planet Earth far away. And how will I be when all that I can see is stars on my space holiday? I think I will be fine. I still want to be a space girl. I just need to take a friend. So call a friend, ask them to come. Traveling with a friend is always fun. I think I will be fine. I think I will be fine with a favorite friend of mine when I'm flying past the hot red sun. Okay, so hopefully with the children, we do that a lot more slowly, and we repeat those actions several times. But hopefully you now have those actions and can follow the lyrics. So now we're going to try. I'd like you to do the actions. I'd like you to be brave. And I would like you to lip sync as well. Are you ready, everybody? Okay. Hands by sides to start. Be brave, be bold. Ready? Ready? Round you go. Ready? Round you go. Last time. Give yourselves a big clap. Well done, everyone. So hopefully that positive message will really help reassure the children and keep a fun and physical focus on our English lessons. So those are my 10 tips today. Let's try and just summarize and pull those together then. Okay, so here they are. First one, if you remember, is clarify the distance. Make distance clear to children using visuals, using objects so they can really conceptualize the 2 meters. Handouts, the message with handouts is handle with care. Handle handouts with care. So think about before your lessons, if you're using worksheets, you're using materials, you're using handouts, giving those out so they don't have to be passed around the class. Also, having children conceptualize the bubble, so a safe space bubble, and that could be by using tape you saw in the photographs, it could be by using chalk. Okay, what else have we got? So, sorry, the need to include social and emotional learning. Lots of ideas there from Mary Delaney. There were, I think, maybe 12 different activities for you to experiment with to really try and build that emotional aspect into your English lessons and boost children's confidence. The idea of rotating chairs for speaking practice, so you don't need to have them moving all over the room, really important. The idea of using shouting dictations, because that creates a real need for distance, yet keeps the focus on using the integrated skills. Doing physical feedback, so that can be with the agreeing and disagreeing, where they stand on their tiptoes for strongly agree, they curl up within the bubble for strongly disagree, and then degrees of height for different levels of agreement and disagreement. Using the activity I Spy as and holding up cards with answers on about themselves as an alternative to mingles and class surveys and milling around. Monitoring tasks visually, so using the color-coded cards for tasks rather than the teacher having to go closely to each and every group and child. And perhaps the most important one for boosting engagement, inspiring children using your fun and your physical songs. So I very much hope that those 10 tips can get you started and help you feel a little more confident for going back to your English lessons physically at school. I don't know how we're doing for time. This is the reference that I wanted to share with you from Mary Delaney. Her article on teaching children and teenagers in a pandemic focused on trauma is full of practical ideas. So I just shared some of my favorites, but there are many more. You can download this entire publication for free. It's a very new publication, and there's a lot of articles and practical ideas on the YLTSIG resources page on the website for you to read and then try out back in the classroom. So hopefully that Mari's article will be useful for you. And I don't know how we're doing for time. Do we have any time for questions?
Yes, actually, we can get a couple of questions.
Great. Okay. Would you like to choose them?
Sure. Well, actually, we have one question on Q&A. Have these tips been tried on university students? My students' age ranges 18 to 21. Which ones would you particularly recommend for older learners? Well,
I mean, my focus very much today was on primary age children. So children, you know, 10 and under, 12 at the maximum. However, the need for social and emotional learning activities in our English lessons, I think, applies to any age. So whether we're working with children, with teenagers, or with adults. And again, I really would recommend you read Mari's article, because she does include some ideas for teenagers and older teenagers as well, which could apply to young adults and university students. So I'd recommend you have a look at that, because all, not just students, but teachers as well, and all people actually, wherever we are in the world, need a boost right now. I'm sure you will agree.
Okay, one more question. Which is your favorite, distance education or face-to-face education?
I think for children, it needs to be face-to-face. I think our online learning with children needs to be an emergency response, because that remoteness isn't the best way, in my view, to reach and teach, to use Carol Reed's expression, to reach and teach children with English. I think that interaction with classmates and with the teacher is absolutely crucial for children. So as long as it's safe and it's okay, it's safe in terms of safety to go back to the classroom, I think physical English teaching with children is crucial, essential, in fact.
Yeah. One last question. What do you think about rewarding children for activities?
Well, I think this links very much back to social and emotional learning, that we're wanting to foster a love of learning. We want to encourage children through our varied and engaging activities, techniques, approaches, materials, to foster a love of English, that they want to come to English class because it's enjoyable to learn. I think extrinsic rewards we need to be very careful of, because then it questions, you know, why are they making the effort? And as many of you will have experienced, learning a language to a proficient level involves tremendous effort. It can be a lifelong endeavor. And so we want to encourage children to be resilient, to make effort and develop that grit for the language learning. And so if we can make our activities as enjoyable, as engaging as possible, then we shouldn't really need to resort to rewards, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you all of you for staying until the end.
Yeah. Many thanks to David for this inspirational session. We came to an end of our Cambridge Day Online Turkey event. It was a great honor to have our international speakers alongside with you, dear teachers. Many thanks to our speakers, Peter Lucantoni, Ben Knight, Benur, and David Valente. It was great to have them all with us today. And dear teachers, thank you all for attending Cambridge Day. We hope that you took many ideas with you from our sessions today. We would love to hear feedback from you to help us shape future events. Our survey will take approximately 3 or 4 minutes of your time and can be completed by clicking the link on the chat box. I've just sent it. The certificate of attendance for the ERT focused talks can be downloaded after the completion of the survey. I'll be sending the link with an email too. Once again, thank you very much for being with us today. Have a great academic year, of course, and hopefully without COVID. Thank you.